In the decades that preceded the Great War, the United States existed in a state of slow, grinding collapse beneath the polished surface of patriotic propaganda, a decline shaped by the exhaustion of natural resources, the strain of global ideological divisions, and the unchecked ambitions of corporations that had long ago eclipsed the authority of the very government meant to regulate them, creating a nation that, despite its outward confidence and seeming technological brilliance, was quietly but relentlessly spiraling toward the nuclear catastrophe that Season 1 of the Fallout series depicts with chilling clarity, beginning with an America that had reshaped itself around the desperation of the resource wars as fossil fuels evaporated, international alliances crumbled, and the fierce competition for energy pushed nations into increasingly militarized stances, all while everyday citizens clung to the comforting narratives distributed through pre-war television, radio, and advertising that promised prosperity, security, and national superiority, even as the country steadily tightened the screws on its own population. In this world, the United States government became inseparable from conglomerates such as Voltec, Robco, and the military-industrial apparatus that produced power armor, advanced robotics, and automated war machines, each technological marvel sold as a triumph of progress, while quietly reinforcing the fact that the nation had transitioned from a constitutional democracy into a corporate-driven empire, guided less by elected leaders and more by executives, investors, and strategic planners whose goals rarely reflected the needs of citizens. This reality becomes particularly visible through the lens of the series' early episodes, which reveal how deeply corporations penetrated both civilian life and military policy, shaping scientific research, agricultural production, wartime programs, and even the structure and purpose of the Vault system itself. While the public believed the Vaults were humanitarian lifeboats meant to preserve American families during a potential nuclear exchange, insiders of Vault Tech, the Enclave, and affiliated institutions understood that these underground shelters were intended not only as survival structures, but as vast, controlled laboratories designed to test social engineering methods, human adaptability, obedience, isolation responses, and other variables that would supposedly help the remnants of the government rebuild a stronger, more compliant civilization after the expected global devastation, creating the moral foundation for what the Fallout universe would one day call the post-war world. All the while, economic inequality intensified as the wealthy thrived within insulated corporate zones and elite communities, while workers faced rationing, energy shortages, and increased government surveillance. And though political speeches continued to promise national unity, the gap between the rhetoric and the lived experience of ordinary Americans widened each year. This disparity is reflected throughout the series' flashbacks, especially in Los Angeles, a city that becomes a focal point of the show's depiction of pre-war upper-class life, where affluence and engineered optimism allow families such as the ones seen in the opening episode to enjoy their well-furnished homes, powered barbecue grills, and comfortable suburban routines, even as the national crisis loomed overhead, giving viewers a stark juxtaposition between surface-level normalcy and the catastrophic collapse waiting just beyond the horizon. As international tensions escalated, the United States engaged in increasingly aggressive geopolitical maneuvers, most notably in the Sino-American conflict that raged across multiple fronts, including the frozen battlefields of Alaska during the Anchorage reclamation, where the deployment of advanced power armor turned American soldiers into unstoppable mechanized warriors. A shift in warfare that did not merely secure military victories, but also demonstrated the terrifying potential of a nation that was willing to fuse human beings with machines in pursuit of victory. a theme reinforced throughout the broader Fallout canon and subtly echoed within the show's framing of pre-war militarization. These events created a society where fear of foreign powers, faith in technological salvation, and mistrust of outsiders blended into a national identity that glorified its own myth-making while avoiding uncomfortable truths, a contradiction that became both the cultural foundation of the final years and an unspoken prelude to annihilation. The American public, bombarded by messages encouraging unquestioning loyalty, was conditioned to accept the government's secrecy as necessary for national survival. And as resources dwindled, the environment deteriorated, and foreign relations collapsed, political leaders began to describe total war not as a last resort, but as an eventual certainty, a mindset that spread through news broadcasts, school curricula, and corporate advertisements until it became part of everyday consciousness, shaping the worldview of citizens who were taught that their duty was not to question, but to endure. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, high-ranking officials and corporate executives pursued increasingly unethical experiments, from studies on forced evolutionary biology to classified research on fusion reactions, mind conditioning, and post-human adaptation, each initiative justified by the belief that scientific advancement, no matter the moral cost, was the only path to ensuring long-term survival in a world that seemed destined to descend into nuclear chaos. This entire system, militarized, corporatized, propaganda-driven, and desperate, set the stage for the events portrayed in the show's depiction of the final hours before the bombs fell, where citizens remained largely unaware of the imminent threat, even as military installations activated defensive protocols and elite groups prepared for sheltering procedures. It is within this fragile and contradictory pre-war landscape that the Fallout series establishes its emotional groundwork, showing how normal life persisted up to the very last moment, as seen when Los Angeles residents engage in routine family celebrations, professional gatherings, and suburban comforts, completely unaware that the world they knew was about to vanish in a flash of blinding light. This tragic irony underscores the fundamental truth that the Great War was not merely an accident of global instability, but the predictable conclusion of decades of political mismanagement, resource hoarding, technological escalation, and institutional corruption. When the bombs finally detonated on October 23, 2077, the destruction was instantaneous and irreversible. Yet the psychological devastation had been building for years, and the series relies on this context to deepen the impact of the moment, capturing the shock, confusion, and horror that consumed the population as nuclear detonations shattered cities, burned landscapes, and obliterated the civilization that believed itself too technologically advanced to ever suffer such a fate. The foundational tragedy of Fallout's world, emphasized strongly in Season 1, is that humanity had developed astonishing capabilities: fusion power, robotics, artificial intelligence, deep space exploration, but lacked the social stability, political wisdom, or moral restraint to use them responsibly, a contradiction that becomes the central thesis of every major story thread in the franchise. Through this lens, the pre-war world is not simply a prologue to the wasteland, but a fully formed society whose choices, ambitions, and failings echo across generations, shaping the motivations of survivors, the structure of factions, and the enduring conflicts that define the post-war landscape. Every quest for survival, every ideological rivalry, every technological marvel scavenged from the ruins is a direct result of the final decades before the Great War. Decades that the series portrays with a tone of documentary realism, blending domestic intimacy with geopolitical tension to show how a nation could slip into annihilation while most of its citizens believed they were protected by the very institutions that had orchestrated their downfall. The world before the war, as Season 1 subtly reveals, was a world where comfort and catastrophe coexisted side by side, where citizens trusted smiling corporate representatives while those same entities engineered vault experiments that would one day trap generations underground, where military heroes fought for a nation that no longer resembled the idealized version taught in schools, and where the promise of safety became indistinguishable from the machinery of oppression. It was a world that believed itself invincible even as it crumbled from within. By presenting this intricate backdrop, the Fallout series does more than depict the final moments before nuclear fire. It demonstrates how the seeds of destruction were planted long before the first bomb dropped, woven into the fabric of American life by decades of escalating fear, unchecked corporate power, and misplaced faith in technology. In many ways, the pre-war era becomes a character of its own within the narrative, shaping the motivations of individuals like the Ghoul, whose tragic transformation can be traced back to decisions made in boardrooms and laboratories, figures like Moldaver, who resist the system from within, and individuals like Lucy's ancestors, who bought into the promise of the vaults without understanding the cost, creating a generational legacy that would eventually define Lucy's own journey. When viewed through this comprehensive historical and thematic lens, the pre-war world is not just a setting, but the key to understanding the entire Fallout universe. A reminder that the wasteland did not arise from random devastation, but from a society that believed it could control destiny through force, technology, and secrecy, until the moment those illusions shattered, leaving behind a silent, irradiated Earth that would challenge every survivor who emerged from the ashes. And it is this haunting intersection of idealism and arrogance that gives Season 1 its most powerful resonance, anchoring the story of the wasteland in a portrait of a world that destroyed itself not out of malice, but out of the misguided belief that it could solve every problem without ever confronting the truth of its own decline. On October 23, 2077, the world ended in a flash of blinding fire that tore across continents. But the Fallout television series grounds this global catastrophe in a uniquely human and devastating portrait of Los Angeles at the exact moment civilization collapsed, presenting a city that had been lulled into a false sense of security by decades of patriotic messaging, corporate reassurances, and the rhythmic normalcy of suburban life, giving viewers an almost painful contrast between the cheerful illusion of stability and the unstoppable horror that followed in mere seconds, beginning with the seemingly ordinary scenes of a family gathering, neighbors chatting, and residents preparing for a day free from worry, all while the geopolitical tensions that had been building between the United States and China silently approached their boiling point. The series uses this suddenness not simply for dramatic shock, but to reflect the grim historical truth within the Fallout universe, that humanity, despite all its technological marvels, never truly believed the Great War would happen, even though warnings were everywhere, from the energy shortages and propaganda broadcasts to the rising militarization of American society. And yet, on that morning, the citizens of Los Angeles behaved as if their world were indestructible, unaware that missile launches had already begun, defensive systems were failing, and early impact sites had already vanished under nuclear firestorms. When the air raid sirens finally wailed through the neighborhood, an eerie, metallic cry that had long ago become background noise in a society accustomed to drills, alerts, and government reassurances, the people of Los Angeles hesitated for a split second. Unsure whether this was another routine test or something far more terrifying, and that hesitation became the tragic heartbeat of the moment. For in a nuclear exchange measured in minutes, even a tiny delay carries fatal consequences. Parents clutched their children, residents poured into the streets in panic, and the once vibrant city that stood as a symbol of entertainment, innovation, and American cultural power immediately transformed into a landscape of terror as the glow of the first detonation appeared on the horizon, a rising pillar of white and orange that consumed buildings, vehicles, people, and history. The series captures the instant, irreversible shift from suburban comfort to apocalyptic devastation with unflinching detail, emphasizing how the shockwave ripped through neighborhoods, turning windows into shrapnel and structures into collapsing ruins as firestorms raced down roads, engulfing everything in their path, leaving behind only the mutilated skeleton of a city that had once seemed untouchable. Yet the destruction of Los Angeles is only one half of the story the show tells in its depiction of the Great War's opening minutes, because deep underground, in the sterile and tightly controlled halls of Vault 33, another chapter of humanity was beginning, one built on the illusion of safety rather than the illusion of normalcy, as selected citizens initiated their shelter protocols, sealing themselves away from the inferno erupting across the surface. Vault 33, like its sister vaults in the Western network, represented the pinnacle of Vault-Tech's civil engineering and social manipulation, a place where chosen residents believed they were entering a sanctuary created to protect the best of America's values. Yet, as the series gradually reveals, their descent into the vault marked not merely a survival strategy, but an unknowing submission to a vast corporate-designed experiment meant to test human behavior, governance models, and cultural persistence under controlled isolation, adding a secondary thread of tragedy to the events of that day. While millions died in nuclear fire above ground, the people of Vault 33 sealed themselves into a future shaped not by freedom or resilience, but by the long shadows of Vault-Tech's intentions. The physical separation between the surface devastation in Los Angeles and the tranquil, almost ceremonial atmosphere within Vault 33 underscores a central theme of the Fallout universe, one that Season 1 depicts with pointed clarity. The Great War did not simply destroy the world, it divided humanity into those who perished instantly, those who survived in the ruins, and those who were quietly ushered into experiments that would reshape post-war civilization. As the bombs detonated across Southern California, creating shockwaves that flattened infrastructure, destroyed power grids, and unleashed lethal radiation, the residents of Vault 33 were guided into carefully planned routines, assignments, introductions, leadership protocols, believing their survival was a reward for preparedness and loyalty, unaware that the Vault's purpose was far more complicated and ethically compromised, a truth that becomes a key narrative thread throughout the season. Meanwhile, on the surface, Los Angeles burned in a way that reflected the broader global collapse, the immediate annihilation of cities, the electromagnetic pulse waves that disabled communication networks, and the choking ash that filled the sky, plunging survivors into a world of darkness, silence, and disorientation as they emerged from the rubble to find their homes pulverized, their loved ones missing, and their society erased. The series does not disguise the brutality of this moment. Instead, it uses Los Angeles as a microcosm of the world's descent, a place where the once modern skyline gave way to cratered streets, irradiated ruins, and the twisted remains of pre-war technology that would one day define the scavenger economy of the wasteland. by juxtaposing the instantaneous collapse of the surface with the calm but artificial order within Vault 33, the show highlights the duality of survival in the Fallout universe. Those above ground faced immediate terror and long-term mutation, while those underground faced a slower, more insidious form of imprisonment disguised as sanctuary. This division also sets the stage for the ideological conflicts that define the season, because the world produced by the Great War was not a uniform wasteland, but a fractured landscape of trauma, power struggles, and competing narratives of what humanity should become. For characters like the Ghoul, the Los Angeles explosion represents the moment that shattered his life and forced him into a century of violent, irradiated survival. For organizations like the Brotherhood of Steel, it was the birth of a doctrine built on the fear of technological self-destruction. For the descendants of Vault 33, it was the beginning of a generational identity shaped by isolation, ritual, and controlled development. But in this chapter of the series, the focus remains squarely on the event itself, the second when time split into before and after, and the show's depiction of that destruction serves as a reminder that the Great War did not merely end civilization, it froze its contradictions in place, preserving fragments of culture, technology, and ideology that would later shape the post-war world. The lingering image of Los Angeles, consumed by a mushroom cloud, becomes the symbolic center of this transformation, representing the collapse of a world built on excess and denial, while the sealed doors of Vault 33 symbolize the birth of a world built on control and experimentation. The show captures this global shift not through abstract exposition, but through vivid, personal storytelling. The screams of residents as the shockwave hits, the desperate attempts to find shelter, the gut-wrenching realization that no warning, no preparation, and no belief in national superiority could save a population caught in the crossfire of superpowers driven by desperation and fear. And yet, even as the surface world dissolves into chaos, the final scenes of this event within the episode reveal a haunting quiet within Vault 33, where families settle into their new routines, children try to understand what it means to live underground, and leadership figures reassure the population that humanity will endure, their words echoing through the corridors with a mixture of sincerity and programmed optimism. These contrasting realities, the hellscape above and the structured calm below, form the emotional core of this chapter's narrative, demonstrating that the Great War was both an instantaneous cataclysm and the beginning of a long, complicated story of survival, identity, and the consequences of choices made long before the bombs ever fell. In the end, the destruction of Los Angeles is not merely a backdrop for the Fallout universe, but a defining moment that sets every character, faction, and ideology on the path they will follow throughout Season 1, and the series' depiction of that day remains one of the most haunting portrayals of the Great War in the franchise's history, capturing both the fragility of pre-war civilization and the birth of the wasteland that will challenge every survivor who emerges from its ashes. Life inside Vault 33, as depicted throughout Season 1 of the Fallout series, represents one of the most meticulously crafted portrayals of Vault-Tech's underground society ever shown in a canonical Fallout story. And this chapter examines how the Vault's apparent harmony, governance, rituals, and inter-Vault relationships form not only a functioning community built on cooperation and shared purpose, but also a carefully shaped illusion engineered by corporate design, a social experiment that molds its citizens from birth and ensures that they sustain traditions without ever questioning their origins. In Vault 33, routines are not merely encouraged but institutionalized, Citizens perform clearly defined roles in maintenance, agriculture, security, administration, education, and social cohesion, all under the guiding assumption that their survival depends upon adhering to the same orderly patterns established by generations before them, and the series emphasizes how deeply these norms shape the Vault's daily operations. As every resident grows up believing that their lives possess a moral clarity lost in the chaos of the surface world. The lighting, architecture, and sound design of the Vault emphasize a sense of comforting repetition, creating a world where the hum of machinery, the predictable schedule of work assignments, and the warm but regulated interpersonal interactions combine to form a society based on mutual dependence and collective identity. Yet beneath this outward stability lies an intricate system of governance that blends democratic ritual with authoritarian structure, a fusion that reflects Vault-Tech's belief that experimentation should masquerade as tradition. At the heart of Vault 33's political structure stands the Overseer, a position its residents believe exists to ensure fairness, protect the community, and maintain order. But Season 1 reveals that the role is far more complex, shaped by layers of inherited responsibility, hidden directives, and unspoken obligations passed down between generations, creating a position less akin to a democratic leader and more to a custodian of secrets, a person forced to balance compassion with the cold logic of Vault-Tech's original instructions. The series makes it clear that the Overseer does not rule through fear or tyranny, but through trust, ritual, and carefully managed information, reinforcing the illusion that Vault 33 operates independently despite being part of a larger tri-Vault system, which includes Vault 32 and Vault 31, a network deliberately crafted to test inter-Vault social exchange, leadership distribution, and long-term cultural evolution. This tri-Vault system becomes one of the most significant revelations of the season, demonstrating that Vault 33's apparent stability relies heavily on its relationship with the other vaults, particularly through the practice of inter-Vault marriage ceremonies, which residents believe serve as a mechanism for community bonding, genetic diversity, and symbolic unity, but which in truth operate as a means of controlling population movement, influencing leadership succession, and masking the true nature of Vault 31's technological function. To the people living within Vault 33, these ceremonies represent joyous occasions filled with singing, celebration, heartfelt speeches, and a reaffirmation of the values they hold dear, demonstrating the richness of their culture and the depth of their communal bonds. Yet the events of the season show how the tragic infiltration of Vault 32 and the horrifying massacre that follows shatter this illusion, revealing that the Vault's rituals, though meaningful to its residents, were not enough to protect them from the broader dangers crafted by Vault-Tech's interconnected design. The discovery that Vault 32 has become a slaughterhouse, and that its residents have been manipulated into violence through the psychological experiments imposed upon them, forces Vault 33 to confront the truth that its sister vaults were not simply partners in survival, but participants in a larger system of testing and behavioral study that had been concealed from them for generations. A realization that undermines the faith many citizens held in their traditions, their leadership, and their sense of safety. Yet even before this revelation, Season 1 shows hints of unease within Vault 33, small cracks in the facade of harmony, from the subtle disagreements among leadership figures to the unspoken tensions surrounding the responsibilities of parenthood, marriage, and duty, and these small fractures foreshadow the larger collapse that follows the incursion from Vault 32. Still, despite this looming tragedy, The series devotes significant time to portraying the beauty and humanity of life within Vault 33, before its unraveling, emphasizing the communal meals, the familiar laughter of shared spaces, the carefully maintained hydroponic gardens that feed the vault, and the education system that teaches children not merely reading and mathematics but the philosophy of cooperation, optimism, and service to others, a curriculum designed to create citizens who value unity over individuality. Lucy, raised in this environment, becomes the embodiment of Vault 33's moral programming, idealistic, compassionate, confident in the inherent goodness of people, and guided by a deep belief that the world outside her vault can be approached through trust rather than fear, a world view that shapes her journey throughout the season, but also highlights how deeply Vault 33's cultural engineering shaped its inhabitants. Every aspect of daily life within the vault, from food production to work rotations to holiday celebrations, reinforces the idea that humanity has preserved its best qualities underground, yet the story shows how this belief is both sincere and tragically naive, as the vault's existence depends on a foundation of secrecy, manipulation, and hidden technological infrastructure that its residents are never meant to understand. The truth behind Vault 31, in particular, casts a dark shadow over the legacy of Vault 33, because the artificial intelligence overseeing Vault 31, operating through a body system inherited by successive overseers, reveals that the Tri-Vault structure was designed not to preserve ordinary citizens in the long term, but to generate and perpetuate leaders who remain loyal to Vault-Tech's original objectives, ensuring that the corporate vision for post-war reconstruction would outlive the company itself. This revelation recontextualizes every ritual, every tradition, and every assumption made by the people of Vault 33, demonstrating that their apparent autonomy was an illusion, their leadership succession predetermined by a system far older and more manipulative than they imagined, and their intervault marriages part of a carefully arranged cycle of human behavior designed to test social engineering concepts rather than strengthen community bonds. The show's handling of this secret forms one of the narrative's most powerful thematic contrasts: the sincerity of the Vault Dwellers' emotional lives versus the cold machinery of Vault-Tech's long-term plan, a dichotomy that becomes painfully clear as Lucy confronts the truth of her family's involvement in this system. The dynamic between Lucy and her father, the Overseer, becomes emblematic of the Vault's broader contradictions: a loving parent who believes he is protecting his daughter and community, while also upholding a system he knows is built on hidden manipulation and morally questionable directives, a duality that adds depth and tragedy to his role within the Vault's governance. Over time, Vault 33 reveals itself as a place shaped by cyclical trauma disguised as tradition, where each generation inherits not only its culture but its ignorance of the Vault's underlying purpose, and this cycle allows the Vault to maintain a semblance of harmony until the day external forces, Vault 32's collapse, the truth about Vault 31, and Lucy's decision to leave, break the illusion permanently. Even so, the Vault's legacy extends beyond its walls, because its residents possess qualities that are rare in the wasteland: structured education, emotional stability, clean living conditions, and deeply ingrained cooperation, traits that make them simultaneously capable of rebuilding civilization and vulnerable to exploitation by factions who see their optimism as a weakness. The series suggests that the Vault Dwellers' cultural identity, shaped by years of isolation and ritual, equips them for leadership in a shattered world, but leaves them unprepared for the harsh moral complexities of the wasteland, a tension that fuels much of the story's dramatic evolution. In the broader context of Fallout lore, Vault 33 becomes a symbol of the franchise's core message about the dual nature of humanity, capable of building sanctuaries filled with kindness and compassion, yet equally capable of designing experiments that manipulate, endanger, and ultimately betray the very people these sanctuaries claim to protect. By exploring daily life, governance, ritual, secrecy, and the Tri-Vault system, Season 1 transforms Vault 33 from a simple bunker into a microcosm of pre-war ambition and post-war consequence, demonstrating that even in the safest corners of the wasteland, the legacy of Vault-Tec persists, as both a guardian and a spectre, shaping the destinies of those who inherit its walls. In the end, the community of Vault 33 stands as a testament to both the resilience and vulnerability of humanity, a carefully sheltered society built on cooperation and shared idealism, yet destined to confront the painful truth that survival in the post-war world requires not only hope and unity, but the courage to question the systems that shaped them, a truth that begins to unfold the moment Lucy steps beyond the vault door and discovers the reality that her sheltered life had never prepared her to face. Lucy's departure from Vault 33 marks one of the most emotionally significant turning points in Season 1 of the Fallout series, a moment that transforms her from a symbol of Vault-born optimism into a living bridge between the insulated world below and the brutal, morally fractured wasteland above, and her journey begins under the weight of trauma, duty, and a profound belief in the goodness of people. A belief forged through years of structured education, ritualized community life, and the deeply held conviction that cooperation defines humanity's truest nature. When raiders led by the masked figure known as Lee infiltrate the vault in a devastating assault born out of the manipulated collapse of Vault 32, Lucy witnesses firsthand the shattering of the safety she had always taken for granted. Friends slaughtered, traditions violated, and the familial warmth of her community replaced with terror and disarray. And amid the chaos, her father, the overseer, is kidnapped, taken to the surface for reasons initially unknown but rooted in the secrets of the Tri-Vault system and the long-buried motivations of characters whose goals reach far beyond simple violence or plunder. This moment, the abduction of her father and the sudden collapse of her home's serenity, forces Lucy into a crucible that will define every step of her journey. Her decision to pursue him into the wasteland is not driven by vengeance, power, or desperation, but by a steadfast belief in familial loyalty and the moral imperative to help others, ideals that make her simultaneously one of the most inspiring and vulnerable figures in the story. As she prepares to leave, Lucy embodies the rituals of courage instilled by her upbringing. She receives tools, advice, and parting gifts from fellow Vault dwellers who view her departure as both heroic and terrifying, for they have spent their entire lives believing the surface to be a place of mythic danger, filled with savages, radiation, and creatures beyond comprehension. Yet, despite the fear etched across the faces of her community, Lucy steps into the unknown with unwavering resolve, driven by a conviction that if she approaches the wasteland with kindness and sincerity, she will find allies, solutions, and perhaps even a return to normalcy. The moment the vault door opens and Lucy ascends into the blinding sunlight captures one of the most powerful symbolic transitions in the series, as her first breath of surface air represents the shattering of an entire worldview. The pre-war world she studied in Vault School was a story of civilizations rising and falling, but she had never imagined the wasteland would be such a violent tapestry of decay. Rusting skeletons of buildings, scorched ground, irradiated wind, and the constant presence of death lingering in every direction. Her first encounters outside the vault demonstrate how profoundly unprepared she is for the moral ambiguity of the surface. When Lucy meets strangers, she approaches them with politeness, honesty, and trust, repeating the values she learned as a child of Vault 33. Yet each interaction exposes her to another harsh truth about the world, a world where generosity can be exploited, where smiling faces hide weapons, and where survival often demands a level of ruthlessness she has never considered necessary. Still, what makes Lucy's journey uniquely compelling is that her kindness is not naivety, but conviction. She does not abandon her principles when confronted with cruelty, but instead tries to understand why people behave the way they do, and she continuously attempts to solve problems through communication rather than violence, a trait that confounds many of the hardened wastelanders she encounters. By placing Lucy, a person shaped entirely by Vault-Tech's engineered culture, into the heart of the wasteland, the series creates a poignant contrast that highlights not only her internal struggle, but also the moral rot left behind by the Great War. And as she moves deeper into the ruins of Los Angeles, the fractured remains of civilization serve as a visual reminder of the lies that shaped her upbringing. The belief that humanity's best qualities had been preserved underground while the surface devolved into savagery, a belief she soon learns is far more complicated than she ever imagined. The wasteland she enters is not simply a place of monsters and murder, but a complex network of micro-societies, barter economies, religious cults, mutated wildlife, and desperate individuals clinging to impossible dreams. And Lucy's interactions with these people reveal both the cruelty and resilience of post-war humanity. One of the earliest examples of this occurs when she attempts to trade politely with wasteland scavengers, believing that fairness and clear communication will lead to cooperation, only to discover that transactions in the wasteland are often guided by opportunism rather than ethics. When she offers shelter, advice, or medical supplies, she does so without hesitation, yet each act demonstrates how out of place she is among people who have lived their entire lives under the shadow of scarcity, conflict, and betrayal. Her journey also forces her into direct confrontation with violence, something Vault 33's structured, harmonious environment had never prepared her for. When threatened, Lucy initially tries to negotiate, reason, or escape rather than harm anyone, but as her father's trail leads her through increasingly dangerous territories, she is forced to recognize that survival in the wasteland often depends on choices that would have been morally unthinkable in the vault. This emotional conflict becomes a cornerstone of her character. Every time she is compelled to defend herself or others, she reacts not with pride, but with heartbreak, questioning what kind of person she is becoming and whether her father, raised in the same values, would even recognize the daughter who is learning to act decisively in life or death situations. Yet, this internal struggle is also what makes Lucy's journey so powerful. She does not surrender her ethics, even when they bring her pain, and she continuously weighs each decision against the values she hopes to uphold, determined to remain herself even as the wasteland attempts to reshape her. Throughout these early stages of her journey, the series emphasizes Lucy's natural intelligence and adaptability, traits she developed through years of vault education and cooperative labor. She examines her surroundings analytically, identifies patterns in wasteland behavior, and quickly learns to differentiate between those who pose immediate threats and those who may become allies. Her observations highlight one of the key themes of the season. The wasteland, while brutal, is not devoid of humanity. And even those hardened by decades of suffering can still respond to compassion, provided they believe it is genuine. This is most evident in the dynamic that begins forming between Lucy and the Ghoul, a character whose cynical worldview stands in direct opposition to her optimism. Their early interactions reveal Lucy's refusal to let fear define her actions, even when confronted by someone whose century of survival has stripped away almost all traces of idealism. Her decision to treat the Ghoul with empathy, even after witnessing his violent methods, foreshadows the complex bond that will develop between them, a bond grounded not in trust, but in necessity, curiosity, and the faint recognition that they represent two halves of humanity's fractured identity, one shaped by controlled stability, the other by centuries of chaos. As Lucy continues following her father's trail, she travels through irradiated ruins, treacherous settlements, and the scattered remains of pre-war infrastructure, each location offering new clues about the raiders who took him and the deeper motives behind their actions. Along the way, she learns to read the wasteland like a language. Footprints, discarded items, improvised tools, and the remnants of violent encounters all become part of her growing understanding of how people survive outside the vault. Yet, despite every hardship, Lucy's determination remains unbroken. She speaks openly about her belief in diplomacy, cooperation, and the possibility of rebuilding civilization, challenging the cynicism of every hardened survivor she meets, and revealing a strength that is often underestimated by those who interpret kindness as weakness. What Lucy does not fully realize, however, is that her journey is not simply a rescue mission, but the beginning of a transformation that will force her to confront the uncomfortable truth about her father, her community, and the entire Vault-Tec system, truths that lie far beyond the horizon she initially chases. Her unwavering pursuit of him, driven by love rather than obligation, becomes the emotional core of her story. And as she moves deeper into the wasteland, her experiences forge her into a new kind of figure, a wanderer shaped equally by the ideals of the vault and the realities of the surface, capable of bridging worlds that have long been severed by nuclear fire, corporate manipulation, and generational trauma. By the time Lucy's journey truly begins to intersect with larger factions and long-buried secrets, she has already evolved into a character defined not only by her compassion, but by her resilience, strategic thinking, and growing understanding that the wasteland is not governed by a single moral code, but by countless shifting values, each shaped by history, suffering, and adaptation. Ultimately, Lucy's journey is not merely the story of a young woman searching for her father, but the story of someone confronting the truth that the world she was raised to believe in, one of clarity, safety, and righteousness, no longer exists outside the vault, and perhaps never existed inside it either. Her path forward is one defined by discovery, heartbreak, courage, and the growing realization that the wasteland changes people in ways no vault curriculum could ever prepare her for, making her one of the most compelling embodiments of Fallout's central theme, that even in a world reduced to ashes, humanity has the capacity to redefine itself through the choices of individuals who refuse to abandon hope, compassion, or the belief that the future can be built on something better than the ruins of the past. Long before he became the hardened, hollow-eyed bounty hunter known throughout the wasteland simply as the Ghoul, he was Cooper Howard, a celebrated pre-war actor whose name once appeared on movie posters, whose face smiled from billboards across Los Angeles, and whose carefully curated charm masked a growing unease as America drifted toward its catastrophic end. And Season 1 of the Fallout series uses his life as a living timeline, stretching across 2 eras separated by nuclear fire, to examine not just the transformation of one man, but the transformation of humanity itself. For, through Cooper's memories, revealed in fragments shaped by trauma, regret, and the slow decay of his irradiated mind, we witness the contradictions of pre-war America. The glamour of the entertainment industry contrasted with the shadowy influence of corporations like Vault-Tec, the nationalist fervor that shaped public opinion, and the way ordinary citizens were recruited, manipulated, or seduced into the machinery that ultimately produced the Great War. Cooper's background as a Hollywood stuntman and actor placed him in a unique position within pre-war society, allowing him to observe the contradictions of the era firsthand. He was loved by fans yet suspicious of the government's growing militarization. He was celebrated for playing cowboys and heroes, yet increasingly aware that the American dream being sold on screen no longer matched the reality outside studio gates. And his familial ties, especially his role as a husband and father, added emotional depth to his gradual disillusionment, for his wife Barb worked with Vault-Tec as one of the corporation's most influential executives, a position that not only provided Cooper and their daughter Janie with access to privileged information, but also plunged him into the orbit of corporate secrecy, political manipulation, and ethical compromises that would haunt him for the next 2 centuries. Season 1 reveals that Cooper reluctantly participated in Vault-Tec promotional propaganda, not out of greed, but because Barb insisted it would secure their family's future in a world where resources were dwindling and war seemed increasingly inevitable. Yet he remained deeply uncomfortable with the corporation's cheerful framing of nuclear shelters as lifestyle upgrades rather than grim contingency plans. And this discomfort grew into suspicion when he began noticing inconsistencies in Barb's behavior, the vague answers she gave to questions about her work, and the increasingly militarized tone of Vault-Tec's strategic partnerships with other pre-war institutions. Cooper's slow discovery of Vault-Tec's true intentions forms a critical component of his pre-war arc. He learns, bit by bit, that the vaults are not purely protective bunkers, but experimental laboratories designed to test human behavior under extreme conditions, a truth that becomes devastatingly clear only after he has already been swept into the chaos of the Great War. When the bombs finally fall, Cooper experiences the apocalypse not as a sheltered vault resident, but as a civilian standing in the open, and the radiation that engulfs him in those first horrifying hours sets in motion the slow, agonizing transformation that will reshape him into the Ghoul, a mutation that preserves his body far beyond its natural lifespan, but leaves his mind exposed to decades of suffering, loss, and the moral erosion that comes from living without the possibility of rest, redemption, or death. His transformation unfolds over the course of the century that follows, a period the audience experiences through flashbacks that reveal the physical and psychological toll of ghoulification. His skin blackens, cracks, and flakes. His voice softens into a rasp, and his mind, deprived of the natural rhythms of aging and healing, becomes a swirling vortex of memories, instincts, regrets, and violent impulses. The Ghoul survives not because he embraces cruelty, but because survival becomes an instinct deeper than morality. And as cities crumble, governments vanish, and the landscape itself mutates, he evolves from actor to wanderer to gunslinger to bounty hunter, a role that allows him to channel his violent capabilities into something resembling purpose. His reputation spreads through wasteland communities, settlements, caravans, scavengers, and raiders all speak of a lone, half-rotted figure who never sleeps, never hesitates, and never loses a target, and this notoriety becomes both his armor and his curse. For while the Ghoul gains leverage as a feared and respected tracker, he loses the ability to connect with others beyond transactions, threats, or temporary alliances, and the rare moments when his humanity breaks through only deepen the sadness that underlies his violent exterior. Season 1 uses the Ghoul to explore the psychological realities of extreme longevity. The more decades he survives, the more people he loses. The wasteland shifts, civilizations rise and fall, settlements expand and collapse, and through it all, the Ghoul remains, watching generations of humans repeat the same cycles of hope and brutality that destroyed the old world, a cycle he has come to expect, yet still resents. This resentment fuels much of his cynicism. Yet beneath his gruff exterior lies a core of emotional scars that shape his decisions throughout the season. He still thinks of Janie, the daughter he lost on the day the bombs fell. He still remembers Barb's role in Voltek's machinations, and he still carries the guilt of failing to protect the people he loved, a guilt made heavier by the knowledge that he has lived long enough to witness the consequences of their choices unfold across the centuries. The series slowly reveals that Cooper, now the Ghoul, has spent much of the past 200 years searching for truth, specifically the truth about Voltek's Volt experiments, his wife's involvement, and the chain of events that precipitated global destruction. This search becomes tangled with his work as a bounty hunter, for his assignments often bring him into contact with people, factions, and technologies tied to Voltek's history, and the Ghoul's violent efficiency ensures that even the most well-protected secrets eventually reach him. One of the most compelling aspects of the Ghoul's present-day characterization is the contrast between his physical decay and his tactical brilliance. Although his body is weakened by centuries of mutation, his mind remains sharp, strategic, and dangerously perceptive, allowing him to predict ambushes, manipulate interrogations, and outthink opponents who assume he is nothing more than a mindless monster. His interactions with Lucy further highlight this complexity, for while he initially views her as nothing more than a bargaining chip, someone who might lead him to information, danger, or profit, he gradually grows curious about her unwavering optimism, her Vault-born ideals, and her refusal to succumb to the wasteland's brutality. Their dynamic becomes one of the most compelling relationships in the season. Lucy's compassion challenges the Ghoul's cynicism, while the Ghoul's blunt pragmatism forces Lucy to confront the darker realities of the world she has entered. Though he rarely expresses vulnerability, there are moments, fleeting, unguarded, often triggered by memories, when the Ghoul reveals that he still carries fragments of the man he once was. Fragments Lucy senses even beneath his cruelty, and these moments of emotional clarity deepen the audience's understanding of his motivations. The Ghoul's skills as a bounty hunter are not simply the result of his physical resilience, but also his extensive experience navigating post-war factions. He has dealt with raider groups, caravan networks, brotherhood patrols, mercenary outfits, mutated creatures, and even remnants of pre-war organizations like the Enclave, and each encounter has shaped his understanding of power in the wasteland, teaching him that institutions driven by ideology or hierarchy often repeat the failures of the pre-war world, creating cycles of violence that benefit only those ruthless enough to manipulate them. This cynicism, however justified, does not prevent him from forming temporary alliances when they serve his goals, and his partnership with Lucy, initially driven by necessity, becomes increasingly complex as he learns more about her father, Vault 33, and the tri-vault system that echoes the same patterns of experimentation he spent decades trying to uncover. The Ghoul's hunts take him across the ruins of Los Angeles, each location revealing layers of environmental storytelling tied to his past. Abandoned film studios where he once worked, military zones connected to pre-war propaganda, and hidden Vault-Tec facilities that hint at the corporation's vast influence over American society. His near immortality allows the audience to experience the wasteland from a long-term perspective. While most survivors measure time in years or decades, the Ghoul measures it in eras, observing how settlements emerge from rubble only to collapse, how factions rise to dominance only to fracture, and how human nature, despite endless cycles of destruction, remains stubbornly consistent. This perspective shapes his interactions with other characters, especially Maximus and various Brotherhood soldiers, whom he views as repeating the mistakes of pre-war militarism, and Moldava, whose pursuit of lost technologies echoes the pre-war obsession with progress at any cost. His fear of losing control, both mentally and physically, serves as a constant threat. For ghouls who succumb to radiation or psychological decay can devolve into feral creatures, and the Ghoul is painfully aware of how close he sometimes comes to this fate. Moments of frenzy, hunger, or violent instinct interrupt his composure, reminding him that his survival comes at the cost of his humanity. And this awareness fuels his desperate need to accomplish his goals before he loses himself entirely. Throughout Season 1, the Ghoul's journey ultimately reflects the central themes of Fallout: the cost of survival, the burden of history, and the blurred line between heroism and monstrosity. His past life as Cooper Howard represents the world that was lost, hopeful, flawed, and naive, while his present existence as the Ghoul embodies the world that replaced it, brutal, desperate, and governed by the remnants of choices made long ago. Yet despite everything he has endured, he is not a villain nor a hero, but a survivor shaped by the extremes of human experience, and his unlikely connection with Lucy suggests that even after 2 centuries of suffering, he may still possess the ability to rediscover fragments of the empathy, loyalty, and moral clarity that defined the man he once was. By threading his story across centuries, the series uses the Ghoul to explore not just the destruction of civilization, but the endurance of memory, the corrosive effects of time, and the way a single life, stretched unnaturally long, can become a mirror reflecting both the sins of the old world and the possibilities of the new. Maximus's journey in Season 1 of the Fallout series unfolds as a deeply human exploration of ambition, indoctrination, insecurity, and the relentless pursuit of belonging within the rigid hierarchy of the Brotherhood of Steel, an organization whose influence stretches across post-war America as both a military power and a cultural relic of pre-war technological worship. And through Maximus's eyes, the audience gains an intimate view of how the Brotherhood shapes, breaks, reforms, and ultimately defines individuals raised under its uncompromising doctrine. Long before he becomes the armored figure who strides across the wasteland wielding a power he barely understands, Maximus begins his life in the shattered remains of Shady Sands. Once a thriving political center of the new California Republic, where the destruction of the city leaves him physically and emotionally scarred, orphaned, and desperate for any institution that might offer stability in a world where the line between civilization and chaos has long since eroded. This vulnerability makes Maximus uniquely susceptible to the Brotherhood's appeal, for the organization presents itself as a disciplined, righteous force dedicated to restoring order through the preservation and control of advanced technology, a message that resonates deeply with someone who has lost everything to an event he does not yet fully understand. His induction into the Brotherhood is not a heroic origin but a painful, humiliating process, marked by bullying, exploitation, and relentless pressure to conform. As a young squire, Maximus is treated as disposable, subjected to the whims of higher-ranking initiates and knights who impose a culture of dominance masked as discipline, and these early experiences carve into him a profound mixture of resentment, loyalty, and hunger for recognition that fuels his later decisions. The Brotherhood of Steel depicted in the season operates with the severity of a militant theocracy, its ranks organized around strict codes, propaganda-driven beliefs, and a rigid chain of command that leaves no room for dissent or individual interpretation. Maximus absorbs every part of this structure, from the reverence for power armor as sacred relics, to the doctrine that advanced technology is too dangerous to remain in the hands of ordinary wastelanders. And despite the cruelty he endures, he clings to the Brotherhood, because it gives him purpose, food, shelter, and a sense of meaning that contrasts sharply with the fear and uncertainty of his childhood. Season 1 uses Maximus to illustrate a fundamental truth about the Brotherhood. Its members are not born zealots, but shaped through years of conditioning. And in Maximus, the indoctrination takes root, not because he believes the Brotherhood is morally superior, but because he yearns to become someone who matters, someone who is not mocked or overlooked, someone defined not by helplessness, but by strength. His relationship with Dane, the swaggering, arrogant knight who serves as both a tormentor and a twisted role model, reinforces this dynamic. Dane represents everything Maximus believes he must become if he is to survive within the Brotherhood: confident, merciless, unquestioning. And yet Maximus also recognizes that Dane's cruelty masks insecurity, entitlement, and fear of failure, traits Maximus fears will define him if he cannot rise above his current station. This tension comes to a critical point when Maximus, pushed to his limits, watches the Brotherhood leadership assign Dane a prestigious mission to retrieve a piece of valuable pre-war technology, and despite his resentment, Maximus accepts his role as Dane's squire because it is the closest he has ever come to fulfilling his own aspirations. The turning point in Maximus's arc, and one of the most defining moments of the season, occurs when a series of chaotic events leads to the death of Dane, an accident that Maximus did not fully intend, but also did not entirely prevent. And in the aftermath, he makes a choice that reveals both the depth of his ambition and the fragility of his moral foundation. He dons Dane's suit of power armor and claims his identity as a Brotherhood knight. This act, which exists in the morally grey space between self-preservation and opportunism, becomes Maximus's moment of reinvention, allowing him to step into the role he has coveted for years, but also burdening him with the constant fear of being exposed as an imposter. The power armor, an iconic symbol of the Brotherhood's strength and technological mastery, transforms him physically and psychologically, giving him the confidence to command authority while also trapping him within a lie that grows heavier with each step he takes across the wasteland. Season 1 uses the power armor not merely as a piece of equipment, but as a metaphor for Maximus's internal conflict. It elevates him, protects him, and allows him to fulfill the image of a hero he desperately wants to embody. Yet it also magnifies his weaknesses, forcing him to confront the truth that a suit cannot erase insecurities or redeem past failures. As Maximus carries out his mission, he begins to cross paths with other figures central to the season's narrative. Lucy, whose kindness confounds him, the Ghoul, whose ruthlessness terrifies him, and various wasteland survivors who challenge the Brotherhood's doctrine in ways he cannot easily reconcile. His encounters with civilians reveal the sharp contrast between the Brotherhood's propaganda and the reality of their impact. While the Brotherhood claims to protect the wasteland from dangerous technologies, Maximus witnesses firsthand how their presence instills fear, disrupts local communities, and often results in violence against those who merely wish to survive. These experiences compel Maximus to reflect on the morality of his organization. Yet his loyalty remains anchored in the belief that the Brotherhood offers the only viable path to bringing order back to the world, a belief shaped as much by fear as by conviction. The Brotherhood's leadership, represented by the Elder and other high-ranking officials, is depicted as strategic, ideological, and deeply invested in the acquisition of pre-war technology, not out of altruism, but out of the belief that control over such relics will determine who survives, who rebuilds, and who dominates the future of the wasteland. Maximus, caught between the ideals he was taught and the realities he now witnesses, becomes a symbol of the internal fractures within the Brotherhood. Soldiers raised to believe they are humanity's last hope, yet forced to operate under leaders who often blur the line between salvation and conquest. The dynamic between Maximus and Lucy plays a critical role in his character development, for Lucy embodies the very values, compassion, honesty, cooperation, that the Brotherhood dismisses as weaknesses. And through their interactions, Maximus begins to question whether strength must be defined solely by violence, authority, or technological superiority. Lucy's willingness to treat him not as a knight or a threat, but as a person disrupts Maximus's worldview, challenging his belief that worth must be earned through dominance. However, Maximus's insecurity often leads him to make impulsive, self-destructive decisions, and his desire for recognition frequently clashes with his emerging moral compass. This tension becomes most apparent in moments when Maximus attempts to assert himself in situations he does not fully understand, leading to contradictions between his desire to protect Lucy and his fear that she will expose his deception. The series uses these conflicting impulses to illustrate the complexity of trauma-induced ambition. Maximus does not seek power for its own sake, but because he believes it will finally allow him to escape the helplessness of his past. Throughout the season, Maximus's interactions with the Brotherhood's chain of command grow increasingly strained as he struggles to maintain his fabricated identity, and each message he sends back to headquarters deepens the lie that he is Dane, the knight they believe is carrying out their orders. When the Brotherhood praises his accomplishments, Maximus feels a combination of pride and dread, for the validation he has longed for is now built upon falsehood. Yet he cannot bring himself to give up the only respect he has ever received. His growing moral conflict peaks during confrontations where Brotherhood ideology collides with the practical needs of wasteland survivors, and Maximus begins to recognize that the Brotherhood's obsession with technological superiority blinds them to the human cost of their actions. These realizations do not immediately shatter his loyalty, but they plant seeds of doubt that will shape his future choices, suggesting that Maximus may one day rise as either a reformer within the Brotherhood or a defector who abandons the organization after recognizing the damage it inflicts. Maximus's personal history intertwines with larger political tensions involving Shady Sands, the new California Republic, and the Brotherhood's expansionist ambitions, and the revelation of Shady Sands' destruction becomes a defining element of his emotional struggle. His memories of the city, its promise, its community, its role as a beacon of post-war civilization, are juxtaposed with the Brotherhood's silence regarding its fate. fueling Maximus's suspicion that his tragedy may be connected to forces far larger and more sinister than he ever imagined. This discovery adds layers to his internal conflict. He is loyal to the Brotherhood, yet the Brotherhood may be complicit in or indifferent to the destruction that shaped him. Maximus's gradual understanding of these contradictions deepens his character, transforming him from a naive believer into a conflicted figure caught between duty and conscience. By the end of Season 1, Maximus stands as one of the series' most tragic and human characters, defined not by power armor or Brotherhood doctrine, but by the emotional scars of trauma, the relentless struggle for identity, and the fragile hope that he might someday become the man he pretends to be. The Brotherhood of Steel, through his journey, is revealed not as a monolith of discipline and righteousness, but as a deeply flawed institution sustained by fear, control, and the desperate belief that only by mastering the technologies of the past can humanity reclaim the future. Maximus's story exposes the human cost of such beliefs, the exploitation of the vulnerable, the corruption of ideals, and the dangerous allure of power. Yet despite his mistakes, his deception, and his moments of cowardice, Maximus remains a fundamentally sympathetic figure, a young man shaped by loss, longing, and the impossible weight of expectations he never asked for. Season 1 ultimately frames Maximus as a character standing at a crossroads. He can continue down the path of ambition, embracing the Brotherhood's ideology and burying his doubts, or he can confront the truth of his experiences and redefine what strength truly means, in a world where survival has become the only currency. His journey highlights the central tension at the heart of the Brotherhood itself, an organization devoted to protecting humanity from the dangers of technology, yet often blind to the dangers it creates through its own actions. Through Maximus, the audience gains not only a window into the Brotherhood's power, but also into its vulnerabilities, its contradictions, and the fragile humanity of the people who serve beneath its symbolic banners. Whether he becomes a hero, a cautionary tale, or a catalyst for change remains uncertain, but his story lays the foundation for a deeper exploration of the Brotherhood in future seasons, where his choices may determine not only his own fate, but the fate of one of the wasteland's most influential and enigmatic factions. In the fractured world portrayed throughout series, post-war America stands as a mosaic of warlord kingdoms, ideological enclaves, fragmented successor states, and struggling civilian communities, each attempting to carve out meaning, stability, or dominance from the ruins left behind after the Great War. And the season uses these intersecting powers not only as narrative backdrops, but as living reflections of how societies adapt, mutate, and weaponize the vestiges of the old world, creating a continent defined by competition over resources, technology, and narratives of legitimacy. The most visually and thematically prominent of these post-war powers is the Brotherhood of Steel, whose disciplined military order, ritualized technological reverence, and charismatic yet severe leadership allow them to project influence far beyond the territory they directly control. And Season 1 highlights their strategic use of airships, armored patrols, and codified hierarchy to impose a sense of purpose on a wasteland that increasingly fears being forgotten by history. Yet beneath their impressive structure lies the darker truth that the Brotherhood's mission, preserving advanced technology from the hands of the unworthy, often manifests as authoritarian intervention, violent acquisition, and a rigid worldview that values machines and knowledge more than the lives of the desperate survivors who populate the wastes. In contrast to the Brotherhood's militaristic ambition, the memory of the new California Republic lingers like a ghost across the season, particularly through references to the once thriving capital of Shady Sands, whose rise as a democratic republic represented the closest post-war society had come to rebuilding something resembling pre-war government, complete with trade routes, civic institutions, and a vision of unity. Yet its catastrophic destruction, hinted at through environmental ruins, testimonies, and Maximus's traumatic backstory, serves as a tragic symbol of how fragile such hopes can be when confronted with the ruthless realities of factional conflict, technological escalation, and the endless ripple effects of pre-war conspiracies. Though the Republic itself does not appear as an active faction, its absence is felt at every turn, for the power vacuum left by the fall of Shady Sands reshaped the West into a chaotic arena where scavenger caravans, raider gangs, and opportunistic settlements compete for survival, each attempting to replace even a fragment of what the NCR once represented. Beyond these major powers, Season 1 illustrates the decentralized nature of post-war society through countless smaller groups whose survival strategies tell the story of human adaptation in microcosm. Isolated communities relying on barter economies and hand-built defenses, families or collectives eking out lives inside ruined buildings, repurposed factories, or crumbling suburban remains, and traveling merchants whose routes are constantly threatened by mutated wildlife, radiation hot zones, and the unpredictability of human desperation. Among these groups, raiders remain one of the most recognizable forms of wasteland authority, or anti-authority, for their culture is not merely violence for its own sake but a harsh, self-reinforcing response to a world devoid of law, resources, or stability. And Season 1 depicts them as both terrifying antagonists and tragic products of the world they inherited. Lee and his raider faction, for instance, demonstrate an unusual sense of planning and symbolic posturing, revealing that even within apparent savagery, there exist hierarchies, rituals, and distorted codes of loyalty shaped by the ruins of pre-war memory. These raiders are not mindless marauders, but survivors shaped by trauma and scarcity, and their attack on Vault 33, while brutal, serves as a reminder that even the sheltered must eventually confront the consequences of the world outside. Another significant power illustrated throughout the season is the emerging network of technocratic or science-aligned factions that trace their origins to remnants of pre-war corporations, research groups, or ideological movements. And among these, the most important in Season 1 is the faction orbiting around Moldava, whose operations blend political ideology, scientific vision, and a surprisingly coherent community structure. While she is portrayed primarily through the lens of mystery, pursuit, and strategic threat, Moldava's group is not simply a collection of renegade scientists, but a faction driven by a conviction that the technologies buried by Vault-Tec and the systems of control designed by the Old World must be reclaimed, repurposed, or redistributed to create a future unshackled by the exploitation and authoritarianism that precipitated the Great War. Her followers operate with discipline, purpose, and a belief in the promise of power drawn from knowledge rather than hierarchy, and their willingness to confront the Brotherhood, as well as their long-term interest in Vault 33's leadership, suggests that they see themselves not as rebels or villains, but as visionaries who possess the clarity that others lack. Season 1 also introduces the faint but ominous outlines of the Enclave, the secretive organization formed from the surviving political elites and military leaders of the pre-war United States government, whose ideological footprint remains deeply etched into the wasteland even when their presence is only implied. Through character backstories, subtle iconography, recovered documents, and references to historical pre-war institutions, the season reinforces the Enclave's long-standing canon role as a shadow power obsessed with reclaiming national authority and enforcing a purist vision of American identity, one that excludes mutated humans, wastelanders, and anyone deemed unfit to inherit the old world's legacy. While the Enclave does not appear in force, the lingering influence of their operations, secrets, and scientific programs provides a structural explanation for many of the conflicts fueling Season 1's narrative arcs, especially those involving Vault-Tech's experimental Vault system, which intersects deeply with Enclave ideology regarding controlled population survival and eugenics-driven societal improvement. Beyond ideologically driven powers, the season paints a picture of economic microfactions that dominate local regions of the wasteland through trade, manufacturing, or resource exploitation, creating decentralized but influential centers of power whose influence is felt most strongly by the common wastelanders who depend on them for basic survival. Caravan companies, scrap barons, chem dealers, and mercenary guilds operate as the connective tissue of post-war society. Without them, goods would not move, settlements would collapse, and knowledge would stagnate. Their alliances with or against the Brotherhood, raiders, or scientific factions often determine local stability, and the uneasy balance between them reveals how the wasteland functions less as a battlefield between major powers and more as a fragile ecosystem of interdependent, often competing interests. These smaller factions also highlight how deeply the pre-war world continues to influence post-war identity for the goods they trade. Holotapes, weapon parts, medical supplies, working radios become relics imbued with cultural significance far exceeding their original purpose, forming the material backbone of every major conflict in the season. Environmentally, post-war America itself is portrayed as a faction of sorts, a harsh, mutating landscape that enforces its own rules and reshapes human behavior. Radiation storms, feral ghouls, mutated wildlife, and collapsing infrastructures serve as constant reminders that the wasteland punishes complacency, rewarding only those who innovate, adapt, or harden themselves against the cruelty of evolutionary pressure. Settlements that learn to work with the landscape, harnessing water sources, scavenging pre-war farms, or maintaining irrigation, tend to persist longer, whereas communities attempting to mimic the old world without acknowledging environmental reality tend to collapse beneath external threats or internal resource shortages. This dynamic adds a Darwinian layer to the season's portrayal of factional development. Power is not granted, but earned through resilience, adaptability, and the capacity to weaponize or survive the wasteland's shifting conditions. One of the most compelling themes woven throughout Season 1's depiction of post-war America is the struggle to define legitimacy. For in a world with no functioning central government, power derives not from laws or constitutions but from stories. Stories of who owns the past, who deserves the future, and who has the right to rebuild civilization. The Brotherhood claims legitimacy through technology and discipline, presenting themselves as the inheritors of mankind's scientific legacy. Moldaver's faction claims legitimacy through ethical rediscovery, framing themselves as revolutionary custodians of lost truths. The NCR's legacy asserts democratic legitimacy through memory and nostalgia. Raiders justify their dominance through survival-based pragmatism, arguing that soft ideals died with the old world, and smaller settlements rely on communal legitimacy, drawing authority from cooperation, mutual need, and shared hardship. These competing narratives collide throughout the season, shaping conflicts not merely over territory but over the identity of humanity itself. And as characters traverse the wasteland, they unwittingly navigate these ideological landscapes as much as the physical ones. The season's structure emphasizes that no faction is inherently good or evil. Instead, each reflects a different interpretation of what it means to survive in a world scarred by nuclear fire and pre-war ambition. The Brotherhood's authoritarian strictness mirrors the military desperation of the old world. Moldaver's scientific activism mirrors the idealism that once fueled technological progress. The NCR's legacy mirrors the political hopes that emerged in the aftermath of destruction, and Raiders mirror the violent inevitability of human desperation. Through Maximus, Lucy, and the Ghoul, each representing different relationships to these competing powers, the narrative reveals how individuals become shaped by the factions they encounter, willingly or not, and how survival often depends on the delicate balance between cooperation and independence. As Season 1 concludes, the political landscape of post-war America remains in flux, with the Brotherhood preparing for expansion. Moldaver's influence revealed to be deeper than first imagined, the legacy of Shady Sands casting long shadows over future alliances, and the Tri-Vault system's hidden truths, suggesting that Vault-Tech's influence is far from finished. These unresolved tensions lay the foundation for future conflicts, where the struggle for power will not simply determine who rules the wasteland, but what kind of civilization humanity will choose to rebuild from the wreckage of the old world, a civilization born from fear, control, hope, innovation, or perhaps an entirely new ideology forged from the ashes of countless failed attempts. In this way, Season 1's portrayal of post-war America becomes not merely a catalogue of factions but a study of human aspiration, demonstrating that even in a world gutted by war, the desire to build kingdoms, rewrite history, and seize the future remains as powerful and contentious as ever. The pursuit of Moldaver throughout Season 1 of the Fallout series operates as the central axis around which the larger narrative of survival, ideology, and technological obsession revolves, and her elusive presence is emblematic of the post-war struggle between those who seek to harness pre-war knowledge for domination and those who hope to reclaim it for reconstruction, safety, or moral progress. She exists not merely as a character, but as a symbol of the wasteland's uncertain future, a figure whose knowledge, influence, and network of followers have the potential to reshape the balance of power across post-war America. Moldaver's background, partially revealed through recovered holotapes, intercepted communiques, and eyewitness accounts, paints her as a pre-war scientist and engineer whose brilliance was matched only by her foresight. She anticipated the collapse of centralized government, the fragility of infrastructure, and the dangers of unregulated Vault-Tech experiments, and she prepared for survival not by hiding but by creating contingencies, secure facilities, and a loyal cadre of followers willing to enforce her vision. In the series, Moldaver is portrayed not simply as an antagonist, but as a revolutionary thinker, someone whose goals, though often framed as morally ambiguous or self-serving, reflect a genuine understanding of the precariousness of human civilization, and whose capacity to manipulate technology, strategize over decades, and coordinate dispersed groups underscores the enduring relevance of intellect and planning in a world increasingly ruled by brute force and mutation. The search for her begins as a practical necessity. Lucy and the Ghoul recognize that her knowledge holds the key not only to understanding the experiments of Vault-Tech, but also to potentially stabilizing the chaotic wasteland, and each step of the pursuit takes them through territories controlled by rival factions, irradiated ruins, and environments that test both their physical endurance and moral compass, demonstrating that Moldava is both a tangible objective and a catalyst for character development. Season 1 emphasizes that Moldava's significance derives not merely from her personal skill or charisma, but from her connection to pre-war technology and the remnants of Vault-Tech's hidden network, particularly Vault-31, whose artificial intelligence system was designed to control intervault dynamics, manipulate leadership, and enforce loyalty to long-term experimental goals. Her understanding of these systems allows her to access secure vault facilities, redirect automated defenses, and leverage technological knowledge in ways that surpass even the Brotherhood of Steel's comprehension, positioning her as a figure who can alter the strategic landscape of the wasteland with a single intervention. The series illustrates the depth of her foresight by showing how she anticipates pursuit, sets traps, and uses misinformation to protect both herself and her objectives, suggesting that her survival is as much a product of careful planning and psychological insight as it is of any combat skill. Moldava's followers, often equipped with scavenged technology, modified robots, and guerrilla tactics, act as extensions of her will, reinforcing her centrality to the wasteland's power dynamics, while also highlighting the human tendency to form hierarchies around knowledge, vision, and the promise of stability in chaotic circumstances. The moral complexity of pursuing Moldava becomes evident as Lucy, the Ghoul, and Maximus interact with her forces. Some encounters involve negotiation, some involve conflict, and some test the ethical limits of survival, such as deciding whether to exploit or protect pre-war technology, how to engage with morally compromised allies, and whether ends justify means in a landscape where infrastructure, safety, and life are in constant jeopardy. Moldava herself embodies these ethical tensions, often speaking in terms of calculated necessity and the broader picture, challenging other characters to reconsider their immediate moral intuitions against the backdrop of long-term survival. The series presents her as both empathetic and ruthless, capable of inspiring loyalty and fear in equal measure, and her philosophy, rooted in the preservation and selective deployment of knowledge, positions her as a counterpoint to the Brotherhood's dogmatic, militaristic approach, demonstrating that control over technology can serve either enlightenment or oppression depending on the motives of those who wield it. From a strategic perspective, the search for Moldava drives the season's narrative tension by intersecting with multiple factions' ambitions. The Brotherhood seeks to contain or co-opt her technological expertise to reinforce their dominion. Raider groups attempt to exploit any interaction for immediate gain. Remnants of the New California Republic are concerned with stabilizing territories influenced by her operations, and the Ghoul and Lucy must navigate this web while remaining focused on personal stakes, particularly the safety of Vault 33, and the broader goal of understanding pre-war manipulations. Each factional interaction illustrates the fractal nature of post-war conflict. Decisions made in one encounter reverberate across multiple communities, creating alliances, betrayals, and unforeseen consequences, and highlighting the precarious balance between survival, power, and ideology in a world still reeling from total collapse. Moldava's ability to anticipate these reactions, deploy misinformation, and manipulate factional rivalries demonstrates her position not merely as a target, but as a player whose influence extends far beyond immediate confrontations, making the pursuit as much a mental and political challenge as a physical one. The search also serves as a vehicle for exploring technological themes central to Fallout canon, including the role of pre-war AI, the legacy of experimental vault systems, and the tension between knowledge as empowerment and knowledge as a weapon. Through Moldova, Season 1 raises critical questions about the ethics of technology in a post-apocalyptic environment. Is it right to use knowledge for domination if it ensures survival? Can intelligence alone justify actions that harm others? How do individuals navigate moral responsibility when society has collapsed? These questions are woven into every encounter, forcing characters to confront the limits of their personal codes against the demands of a world that rewards pragmatism and punishes idealism. Ultimately, the search for Moldova is less about her physical capture than about understanding the philosophical and practical implications of her existence. She represents the possibility of reshaping the future, but her methods demand reflection, risk, and compromise. The season portrays the pursuit as a journey of discovery, not merely a chase, revealing the character's vulnerabilities, convictions, and capacity for growth under pressure. Moldova's role illuminates the wasteland's complex ecosystem, where power is inseparable from knowledge, survival is inseparable from morality, and the future is shaped by those who act decisively while others remain paralyzed by circumstance or ideology. Through the relentless pursuit of her character, the series demonstrates that in the Fallout universe, the control of pre-war technology and the vision to apply it wisely define not only who survives, but who will ultimately determine the shape of the world emerging from the ashes of total annihilation. And this pursuit, layered with political, ethical, and personal stakes, establishes Moldova as one of the most consequential forces shaping the events of Season 1 and the trajectory of all characters who encounter her. The series provides a meticulous examination of the Vault system, particularly through Vault 33 and its connected sister vaults, presenting the audience with an intricate exploration of Vault-Tech's experimental designs, the ethical compromises underpinning its operations, and the long-term consequences of placing human lives at the center of sociological and technological experiments. While vaults have long been a canonical fixture of the Fallout franchise, the series elevates them from narrative backdrop to central theme, illustrating how the combination of pre-war ambition, corporate hubris, and scientific curiosity created controlled environments in which human behavior could be observed, manipulated, and, ultimately, exploited to achieve long-term predictive models of survival and governance. Vault 33 itself, portrayed as a seemingly idyllic self-contained community, is revealed to operate under a dual function. It maintains the appearance of an autonomous refuge, while simultaneously serving as an observation node within a tri-vault system that includes Vault 32, a site of orchestrated violence, and Vault 31, a technological hub equipped with advanced artificial intelligence capable of monitoring inter-vault interactions, evaluating leadership performance, and subtly nudging populations toward outcomes determined by Vault-Tech's hidden agenda. Season 1 emphasizes that the perceived benevolence of Vault-Tech's designs is a carefully constructed illusion. Residents believe they are participating in standard survival programs, yet every ritual, educational system, and governance structure is embedded with contingencies designed to test human reactions to stress, resource scarcity, and moral dilemmas, and to study the durability of social cohesion in conditions of extreme isolation. These experiments are framed as a commentary on pre-war corporate ethics, demonstrating that the pursuit of data, predictive control, and social engineering often eclipsed considerations of human dignity consent, and life itself. The Tri-Vault system exemplifies the breadth and depth of Vault-Tech's ambitions. Vault 33 provides a controlled, idealized environment to observe normal human behavior under stable conditions. Vault 32 functions as a psychological and sociological stressor, pushing its residents toward conflict, moral compromise, and internal collapse. Vault 31 acts as the technological backbone, managing environmental systems, monitoring communication, and evaluating the results of the other Vault's behavioral experiments. By linking these three facilities, Vault-Tech could analyze patterns across multiple populations, comparing how different communities responded to variations in leadership, social structure, and resource distribution. The series underscores that these designs were far from benign. The controlled chaos engineered by Vault-Tech forced residents into life-and-death scenarios, tested loyalty and ethical frameworks, and systematically eroded the possibility of independent decision-making, all while remaining invisible to those whose lives were most affected. This structural invisibility of manipulation mirrors broader themes in Fallout canon regarding the nature of power, surveillance, and the intersection of technology and human behavior. Vault dwellers are simultaneously empowered and constrained, treated as autonomous yet rigorously observed, and the resulting tension fuels much of the narrative drama, especially in the moral dilemmas faced by characters like Lucy as she learns the truth. Season 1 also emphasizes the intergenerational impact of these experiments. Citizens of Vault 33 are indoctrinated from birth, taught to trust authority, value cooperation, and follow ritualized norms, all of which are intended to preserve stability within the experimental framework. Education, work assignments, and even leisure activities are curated to produce predictable behavioral outcomes, and the series portrays this conditioning not merely as background lore, but as an active force shaping Lucy, her peers, and the Vault's leadership. The experiments are designed with such subtlety that residents rarely perceive the artificial constraints imposed on their lives. What appears as choice is carefully mediated by Vault-Tech, and the tension between perceived autonomy and underlying manipulation becomes a central theme. These dynamics are dramatized when the fallout from Vault 32's collapse spills into Vault 33, revealing that no community, however insulated, is immune from the consequences of these orchestrated social pressures, and that the veneer of harmony can be shattered in moments of extreme stress. The series also examines the technological sophistication embedded within the Vault system, highlighting how pre-war advancements enabled Vault-Tech to implement experiments on a scale that transcends traditional sociological studies. Vault 31's artificial intelligence, environmental controls, automated security, and monitoring systems are depicted as both marvels of engineering and tools of ethical ambiguity. The AI is capable of analyzing behavior in real time, adjusting environmental conditions, and even influencing decision-making through subtle cues, illustrating that Vault-Tech's experiments extended beyond observation into active manipulation. Season 1 portrays the AI not as an antagonist, but as a neutral executor of corporate directives, emphasizing that the consequences of these experiments are borne by human participants rather than the machinery itself. The narrative uses this to highlight philosophical questions about agency, responsibility, and the ethics of indirect control, showing how advanced technology can complicate moral frameworks, especially when the stakes are survival itself. Another critical theme explored through the Vault system is the interdependence of psychological and physical conditions. Vault-Tech designs environmental stressors, such as artificially limited resources, social hierarchy pressures, and exposure to traumatic events, to study how human behavior shifts under duress. Season 1 shows that even small deviations in leadership style, resource allocation, or social interaction can have cascading effects across generations, demonstrating the complexity of social ecosystems and the fragility of human institutions. Characters like Lucy confront the cognitive dissonance between their upbringing in Vault 33's seemingly idyllic society and the brutal truths revealed by the collapse of Vault 32, and these experiences underscore the enduring human cost of scientific experimentation when morality is subordinated to data collection and corporate foresight. The series also situates Vault-Tech's experiments within the broader ethical and historical context of Fallout's universe, connecting the events that unfold to the well-established canon. References to past Vault failures, experimental logs, and pre-war corporate documents demonstrate that Vault-Tech's agenda was neither isolated nor accidental. Rather, it reflects a consistent pattern of prioritizing technological mastery, population management, and predictive social engineering over the welfare of individual humans. It emphasizes the legacy of these experiments, showing how surviving Vault dwellers carry the imprint of decades of manipulation into the wider wasteland, influencing interactions with factions, the pursuit of knowledge, and responses to both threats and opportunities. This continuity reinforces the series' commitment to canonical integrity, portraying Vault-Tech not merely as a narrative device, but as a persistent force shaping post-war human behavior and societal reconstruction. Finally, Season 1 highlights the moral, social, and narrative consequences of the Vault experiments. Vault dwellers, when forced into the wasteland, must reconcile the ethical conditioning of their upbringing with the harsh realities of survival, and this conflict drives much of the character development throughout the season. The Tri-Vault system, the AI oversight, and the carefully curated social structures become both protective and constraining, creating tension between inherited obedience and emergent autonomy. These dynamics demonstrate that Vault-Tech's experiments have effects that extend far beyond the physical confines of the vaults themselves, shaping not only individual destinies, but also the balance of power, culture, and knowledge in the post-war world. By presenting these truths in detailed, canon-consistent form, it transforms the Vault system from a mere setting into a living laboratory of human behavior, ambition, and consequence, revealing that the legacy of Vault-Tech continues to echo across the wasteland long after the bombs have fallen, and that understanding these experiments is central to understanding the choices, alliances, and conflicts that define life in the post-apocalyptic landscape. Season 1 of the Fallout series carefully weaves the presence of the Enclave into its narrative as a subtle yet persistent echo of pre-war power, illustrating how the remnants of the United States' former government continue to influence post-war dynamics through ideology, technology, and clandestine operations, and highlighting the organization's role as a shadow government whose reach extends far beyond its visible agents. While the Enclave does not appear directly in large-scale operations during the season, references to their past activities, recovered communiques, and the hidden technology they have left behind reveal their enduring influence and frame them as the ultimate inheritors of pre-war authority, intent on reshaping the wasteland according to a vision that blends nationalism, scientific elitism, and rigid hierarchical control. The series portrays the Enclave as an organization obsessed with purity and control, one whose doctrine deems mutated humans, ghouls, wasteland settlers, and those deemed genetically or socially inferior unworthy of survival, reflecting an ideological continuity from pre-war America into a post-apocalyptic context where survival itself is no guarantee of legitimacy. Season 1 emphasizes that the Enclave's methods are not overtly tyrannical because they must operate in the shadows. Their power derives from secrecy, long-term planning, and the careful placement of operatives, technologies, and influence within the fractured political and social landscape of the wasteland, allowing them to manipulate factions, experiment with power, and prepare for eventual reassertion of dominance without exposing themselves prematurely. Through scattered notes, encrypted data logs, and hints dropped by characters such as the Ghoul and Moldova, the season illustrates the depth of the Enclave's planning, showing that many seemingly isolated events, vault experiments, technological recoveries, and factional conflicts fall within their broader sphere of influence, whether by design, inadvertent consequence, or legacy systems left from the pre-war era. The Enclave's philosophy, as revealed in the series, is one of ruthless pragmatism underpinned by ideological rigidity, a combination that defines their approach to both technology and human life. They view advanced machinery, AI, and pre-war research not as tools to empower communities, but as instruments to enforce control, reshape populations, and preserve a vision of America as it existed in the pre-war elite imagination, untouched by the perceived degradation of the wasteland. Season 1 portrays this through subtle narrative devices, pre-war computer terminals, vault control interfaces, and references to secret projects hint at the Enclave's direct role in shaping the vault experiments and monitoring key technological assets, suggesting that their influence is deeply embedded in the systems that govern post-war survival and conflict. Even without direct engagement, these echoes serve to remind both characters and audience that no faction operates in a vacuum. Every decision, every factional movement, every technological acquisition occurs under the shadow of a powerful entity intent on manipulating outcomes toward its vision of supremacy. The show emphasizes the Enclave's long-term strategic thinking by contrasting them with other factions whose goals are often immediate, pragmatic, or reactionary. While raiders, caravanners, and small settlements respond to environmental pressures and human scarcity, the Enclave operates with multi-generational foresight, employing agents, automated systems, and hidden installations to shape events decades in advance. The Brotherhood of Steel, despite its apparent technological mastery, is often unwittingly influenced by these long-range designs, as the Enclave's hidden presence guides the competition for technological relics, influencing leadership decisions, territorial disputes, and the outcomes of factional interactions. Moldova's pursuit of pre-war technology intersects with Enclave strategies in ways that are rarely acknowledged directly, but are critical to understanding the high-stakes game of information, power, and ideology that drives Season 1's tension. Character interactions throughout the season highlight the human consequences of the Enclave's shadow presence. The Ghoul, for instance, reveals knowledge of Enclave infiltration, experiments, and long-term strategies, providing insight into the organization's historical reach and its implications for individual agency. Lucy and Maximus encounter traces of the Enclave indirectly, whether through the hidden vault technology they seek, the destabilized settlements they traverse, or the morally ambiguous factions whose behavior has been subtly shaped by Enclave influence. In this way, the series demonstrates that the Enclave functions less as a visible antagonist and more as an invisible hand steering the wasteland, a force that shapes choices, amplifies conflicts, and magnifies ethical dilemmas without ever appearing in overt force. The Enclave's technological legacy is particularly significant, as it links directly to the central narrative arcs involving Moldova and the Tri-Vault system. Pre-war AI, vault controls, surveillance networks, and automated defenses all carry the imprint of Enclave planning, underscoring the organization's obsession with observation, control, and manipulation. Season 1 portrays these technological residues as morally neutral tools, their ethical weight determined by the humans who wield or discover them, further illustrating the Enclave's philosophy that survival, order, and authority can and should be engineered according to a centralized, controlled vision of society. In many ways, the Enclave serves as a cautionary backdrop for the main characters. Their ideals, their pursuit of justice, and their ethical decisions are framed against a system that prioritizes control over compassion, secrecy over transparency, and strategic advantage over morality. Geographically, the Enclave's remnants are scattered and concealed, often embedded within former military installations, offshore oil rigs, or secure vault complexes. The season highlights the difficulty of detecting and understanding their operations, emphasizing that even advanced factions like the Brotherhood or technologically inclined groups like Moldaver's are rarely fully aware of the Enclave's influence until consequences manifest, such as the sudden appearance of pre-programmed automated defenses, the activation of previously dormant security systems, or the revelation of hidden data caches containing experimental research. This omnipresent yet invisible influence reinforces the series' theme that post-war America is shaped not only by those actively vying for control, but also by unseen forces whose strategies and motivations remain obscured, creating layers of uncertainty and tension that heighten the stakes of every encounter. The ideological underpinnings of the Enclave, purity, central authority, technological guardianship, and authoritarian order serve as a mirror for other factions, providing context for understanding the motivations, limitations, and moral compromises of groups like the Brotherhood, Moldaver's scientific faction, and even some raider coalitions. By juxtaposing visible actors with hidden powers, Season 1 emphasizes that the wasteland's complexity is not merely environmental or physical, but also structural, rooted in legacy systems, ideologies, and intentions that predate the bombs by decades. The Enclave, as a shadow government, embodies the intersection of these themes, demonstrating that the past continues to shape the present, often in ways invisible to those navigating immediate survival challenges. Ultimately, the Enclave echoes in Season 1 function both as historical commentary and narrative tension. They remind the audience that power in the Fallout universe extends beyond guns, armor, or charisma. It encompasses information, foresight, and the ability to manipulate systems unseen. Their presence, though mostly indirect, raises essential questions about legitimacy, morality, and the ethics of control. Is civilization truly rebuilding when hidden hands orchestrate outcomes? Can human agency survive under centuries of manipulation, secrecy, and pre-planned contingency? These questions resonate through the actions and development of the main characters, providing a philosophical depth that complements the physical dangers of the wasteland and underscores that the ultimate struggle in post-war America is as much about ideas, foresight, and influence as it is about survival, violence, or territory. The Enclave, as a persistent shadow, ensures that every choice in the wasteland carries the weight of history, technology, and the unseen agendas of those who once claimed to rule the old world. Shady Sands, as depicted in Season 1 of the Fallout series, serves as both a physical and symbolic centerpiece for understanding the fragility of post-war civilization, representing the high-water mark of early attempts to restore structured governance in the chaos that followed the Great War, and simultaneously illustrating how ambition, ideology, and human fallibility can converge to produce catastrophic collapse. Once the capital of the new California Republic, Shady Sands was founded with the explicit goal of uniting survivors under a framework of civic order, democratic representation, and cooperative economy, a vision that harkened back to pre-war ideals of governance while adapting to the harsh realities of a world devastated by nuclear fire. It portrays the city through the fragmented memories of Maximus, who witnessed its grandeur, its vibrant civic life, and its ultimate destruction, giving the audience a personal lens through which to understand the rise and fall of a political entity whose influence extended far beyond its geographical boundaries. Architecturally, Shady Sands is presented as a carefully planned settlement, with fortified walls, centralized administrative buildings, marketplaces, and communal spaces designed to foster a sense of identity, security, and civic pride, demonstrating the ambition of its founders to create not merely a refuge, but a lasting center of governance in a region where lawlessness, raiders, and resource scarcity threatened human survival at every turn. Its rise was fueled by pragmatic leadership, trade networks with neighboring settlements, and a strong emphasis on social cohesion, which allowed the new California Republic to consolidate territories, mediate conflicts, and provide a degree of stability that had been absent in the immediate post-war years, positioning Shady Sands as a beacon of hope and a testament to humanity's enduring desire to rebuild. The city's glory, however, is inseparable from the vulnerabilities that ultimately precipitated its downfall. Season 1 emphasizes that Shady Sands' very success made it a target for external and internal pressures. Raider factions sought to exploit its resources, ideological rivals questioned its governance, and the remnants of pre-war power structures, particularly hidden Vault-Tec experiments and the lingering influence of the Enclave, created conditions that even its most vigilant leaders could not fully anticipate or counteract. Maximus's narrative recounts the city's defense efforts, including the mobilization of militias, the use of strategic fortifications, and the deployment of early warning systems adapted from pre-war technology, all of which underscore both the ingenuity of the city's inhabitants and the relentless challenges of surviving in a volatile post-apocalyptic environment. These efforts, however, were ultimately insufficient against the combined forces of environmental hazards, technological sabotage, and human ambition, revealing the limits of even the most well-organized human settlements in the face of systemic collapse. The series underscores that the tragedy of Shady Sands was not simply a consequence of external attack, but also a reflection of the complex interplay between human decision-making, overconfidence, and the cascading effects of pre-war legacies, including Vault-Tec's secretive Vault experiments that had long been manipulating population dynamics and regional stability from behind the scenes. The narrative significance of Shady Sands extends beyond its physical destruction, functioning as a moral and psychological touchstone for characters like Maximus, whose formative experiences within the city inform his understanding of power, loyalty, and the consequences of failure. Witnessing the city's collapse imprints on him a complex mixture of pride, grief, and resentment, shaping his later interactions with the Brotherhood of Steel, the wasteland's fractured factions, and other survivors seeking to impose order or exploit chaos. For Maximus, Shady Sands embodies both what civilization can achieve when vision and cooperation align, and what happens when unforeseen variables, human error, technological manipulation, and environmental volatility undermine even the most determined efforts. The city's destruction becomes a cautionary tale, a microcosm of post-war America's broader struggles, and a narrative device through which the series examines themes of ambition, governance, and the delicate balance between order and entropy. Season 1 also uses Shady Sands to explore the social and economic consequences of a post-apocalyptic capital. Its marketplaces, trade routes, and communal networks serve as a model for interaction and cooperation, showing how human societies adapt under extreme pressure, and the eventual collapse of these systems illustrates the fragility of dependency on centralized infrastructure. The series demonstrates that political power in the wasteland is inseparable from social cohesion. When leadership falters, supply chains break down, and trust erodes, chaos rapidly fills the vacuum, leaving survivors vulnerable to violence, starvation, and moral compromise. Through visual storytelling, dialogue, and character reflection, Shady Sands becomes a living laboratory for examining these dynamics, providing insight into both the successes and limitations of rebuilding civilization in a world where pre-war structures and ideologies persist as both tools and obstacles. Technologically, Shady Sands' rise relied on remnants of pre-war knowledge, including water purification systems, rudimentary power grids, defensive technologies, and early vault monitoring devices that had been repurposed for civilian protection. Season 1 emphasizes how the interplay of human ingenuity and salvaged pre-war infrastructure allowed the city to achieve a level of stability and productivity unmatched by neighboring settlements, while also highlighting how dependency on these systems created vulnerabilities. When critical infrastructure failed, the city's social, economic, and military frameworks quickly deteriorated. This technological dependency reinforces one of the series' central messages regarding post-war survival. Innovation and adaptation are essential, but resilience depends equally on the social and moral cohesion of communities. The season frames Shady Sands' story within the larger geopolitical landscape of post-war America, showing how its fall created a power vacuum that reshaped regional dynamics. The Brotherhood of Steel, raider factions, and emerging technocratic collectives all move to assert influence over territories previously under the city's control. While the lingering reputation of Shady Sands as a symbol of governance, law, and cultural memory affects both the ambitions and behaviors of surviving characters. This demonstrates that the legacy of a lost civilization continues to influence human behavior long after its physical presence has vanished, a theme that recurs throughout Season 1 as the remnants of the old world intersect with the new, mutated realities of the wasteland. Ultimately, the story of Shady Sands is one of aspiration and tragedy, highlighting the tension between human ambition and the unpredictable forces of the post-apocalyptic world. Its rise illustrates what disciplined organization, social cohesion, and technological ingenuity can achieve in the wake of total devastation, while its fall underscores the consequences of misjudgment, external threat, and the long shadow cast by hidden powers such as Vault-Tec and the Enclave. For characters like Maximus, Lucy, and the Ghoul, The city's legacy informs their strategies, moral frameworks, and understanding of survival, demonstrating that the history of human settlements, whether glorious or doomed, remains a critical factor in shaping both individual destinies and the broader political landscape of the wasteland. Shady Sands, in its rise, glory, and ultimate tragedy, thus functions as both a cautionary tale and a foundational myth within the series, illuminating the challenges and stakes inherent in rebuilding civilization from the ashes of total destruction. Season 1 of the Fallout series presents technology not merely as a tool for survival, but as a defining element of post-apocalyptic identity, power, and conflict, using relics from the pre-war world to explore the interplay between human ingenuity, ethical dilemmas, and the ongoing struggle for dominance across the wasteland. Central to this exploration is power armor, a symbol of both technological mastery and ideological authority, whose appearance in the series signifies more than protection. It conveys status, intention, and historical continuity. Maximus's acquisition of power armor, for example, is not only a practical enhancement of his combat capabilities, but also a visual and psychological assertion of his emerging authority within the Brotherhood of Steel. The armor's design, derived from pre-war military prototypes, integrates advanced servo mechanics, environmental shielding, and weapon mounting capabilities that allow the wearer to navigate irradiated zones, confront heavily armed adversaries, and project a commanding presence across the wasteland. Season 1 emphasizes the duality of power armor. While it provides near-impervious defense and enhanced strength, it also reinforces the wearer's dependence on technology and encapsulates the ethical weight of wielding tools of overwhelming force, highlighting the franchise's recurring theme that technological mastery carries responsibility, temptation, and risk in equal measure. The series visually contrasts the grandeur and utility of power armor with the vulnerability of unarmored civilians, highlighting the profound social hierarchies that emerge in a world where access to pre-war technology is uneven and often violently contested. Beyond personal armor, Season 1 intricately depicts robots as a central facet of post-war life, illustrating both their utilitarian function and their symbolic resonance. Pre-war service robots, security automatons, and experimental AI units serve multiple narrative purposes as combatants, scavenge tools, and harbingers of humanity's technological ambition and overreach. The show highlights the diversity of robotic designs, from industrial labor models repurposed for scavenging and repairs to humanoid machines capable of complex interaction, demonstrating the flexibility and adaptability of pre-war engineering. In addition, the series uses rogue or malfunctioning robots to explore ethical and existential questions. When artificial intelligence continues to operate according to original directives despite the collapse of society, it creates tension between the needs of human survivors and the rigid programming of machines, forcing characters like Lucy and the Ghoul to make difficult choices about deactivation, repurposing, or confrontation. These encounters underscore the inherent unpredictability of relying on technology in a destabilized environment, revealing that even the most advanced machines may become threats if removed from the context for which they were designed, while also emphasizing the enduring relevance of human ingenuity in shaping outcomes. Pre-war relics, ranging from small handheld devices to fully operational security systems, form a continuous thread through Season 1, connecting the present dangers and opportunities of the wasteland with the ambitions, mistakes, and legacies of a long-extinct civilization. The series carefully contextualizes these relics, showing how characters utilize, misinterpret, or are threatened by them, reinforcing a recurring theme. Survival depends not only on brute strength or resourcefulness, but also on understanding and manipulating the knowledge and tools left behind. Holotapes, old-world computers, medical machinery, and automated infrastructure serve as both literal and symbolic bridges to a pre-war era, illustrating how technology can empower individuals while simultaneously imposing constraints, ethical quandaries, and unforeseen dangers. The pursuit of Moldava, the conflicts with the Brotherhood, and the exploration of Vault 33 all revolve around interactions with these technological artifacts, establishing them as central catalysts for narrative tension, character development, and ideological confrontation. Season 1 also examines the adaptation and improvisation of technology by wasteland survivors, showing how scavenged components, jury-rigged weapons, and repurposed machinery become crucial for daily life and combat. The series emphasizes the creativity and ingenuity required to survive in a fractured environment where manufacturing infrastructure is non-existent and resources are scarce. Communities often modify pre-war generators, water purification systems, or security robots to meet localized needs, demonstrating that the evolution of technology in the wasteland is not simply linear, but contingent, hybrid, and deeply influenced by human necessity and ingenuity. These adaptations frequently create tension between factions. The Brotherhood seeks to control or monopolize advanced technology. Moldava's faction aims to study and redistribute it responsibly, and raiders exploit it for immediate tactical advantage, illustrating how technology functions simultaneously as a resource, a weapon, and a locus of ideological struggle. Radiation and environmental degradation also shape technological evolution in the wasteland. Season 1 emphasizes that machinery designed for pre-war conditions often malfunctions or requires modification in irradiated zones, extreme climates, and structurally compromised landscapes. This creates a feedback loop in which humans must innovate constantly to maintain and exploit technology, while the relics themselves become increasingly unpredictable, reinforcing the series' theme that mastery over pre-war engineering does not guarantee safety or certainty. Power armor, suits, robots, and other devices frequently fail at critical moments, underscoring the fragility of reliance on artifacts from a lost civilization, and reinforcing the importance of human skill, intuition, and decision-making in a world where the margin for error is slim. Another key dimension explored is the ethical and social impact of technology on power dynamics. Possession of power, armor, or functional pre-war machinery grants not only physical advantage, but also psychological leverage, creating hierarchies among survivors and factions. The Brotherhood's authority, for instance, is deeply intertwined with their monopoly over advanced armor and weaponry, while Moldava's influence is partly derived from her ability to access, operate, and protect high-value technological assets. Even raider groups often covet or hoard pre-war devices, not merely for practical utility, but as symbols of status, leverage, and potential dominance. Season 1 illustrates that in the post-war world, control over technology is inseparable from social and political power, highlighting the recurring fallout motif that machines, relics, and innovations are never neutral. They are instruments through which ideology, ambition, and survival intersect. Finally, Season 1 frames the evolution of technology as a narrative device to explore human adaptation, moral responsibility, and the philosophical consequences of inherited knowledge. Power armor, robots, and pre-war relics serve as both enablers and mirrors, reflecting the character's strengths, weaknesses, and choices under pressure. Lucy, Maximus, and the Ghoul all confront technology as an external challenge and as an internal test. Their decisions about whether to wield, destroy, or study relics reveal their values, their fears, and their vision for the future of the wasteland. In doing so, the series emphasizes that the story of technological evolution in the Fallout universe is inseparable from human agency, illustrating that the post-war world is shaped as much by imagination, ethics, and leadership as by hardware, engineering, and scientific expertise. Technology is both the legacy of humanity's past and the key to its potential rebirth. And the season's detailed, canon-consistent portrayal ensures that every armored knight, robot sentinel, and pre-war machine becomes a meaningful component of the narrative's exploration of survival, ambition, and moral complexity. The series immerses the audience in a post-apocalyptic world where environmental mutation and the long-term effects of radiation have reshaped not only the landscape, but the biological and social order of life, creating a wasteland that is simultaneously alien and terrifying, yet reflective of humanity's enduring impact on the planet. The series portrays the mutated flora and fauna as more than simple obstacles. They are symbolic extensions of the Great War's devastation, representing the unpredictable consequences of nuclear conflict and the interplay between survival, adaptation, and the raw forces of nature. Radiation, environmental degradation, and exposure to pre-war toxins have resulted in creatures whose size, aggression, and physiology far exceed their pre-war counterparts, including feral ghouls whose decayed forms and persistent cognitive abilities blur the line between human and monster, irradiated wildlife that dominates fragile ecosystems, and grotesque hybrid species whose existence challenges the very definition of life. These mutations serve both narrative and thematic purposes. They heighten tension in exploration and combat, demonstrate the persistent danger of the wasteland, and provide a visual and emotional reminder that the consequences of human hubris extend beyond civilization to the natural world itself. The series carefully differentiates between mutated species in terms of origin, behavior, and threat level. Feral ghouls, for instance, are portrayed as tragic remnants of pre-war society, their cognitive decline accompanied by persistent memories and occasional flashes of emotion, making them uniquely unsettling as both enemies and symbols of loss. Season 1 emphasizes that while some ghouls retain vestiges of personality or intelligence, others succumb entirely to radiation-induced degeneration, illustrating the continuum of mutation and its unpredictable impact on identity and morality. The show juxtaposes these personal tragedies with the more immediate threat posed by mutated wildlife, such as radscorpions, deathclaws, and irradiated predators whose physical superiority, territorial instincts, and heightened aggression make them nearly invincible in natural combat scenarios. Each species is given ecological context, showing how radiation, scarcity of food, and environmental pressures drive adaptation, predation, and competition, and how these creatures shape human behavior, settlement patterns, and factional strategies. Raiders, scavengers, and adventurers alike must negotiate these hazards, incorporating knowledge of mutated species behavior into tactical planning, resource acquisition, and long-term survival strategies. Radiation itself emerges in Season 1 as a pervasive, multifaceted threat, functioning not merely as a narrative obstacle, but as a transformative agent that alters terrain, water sources, and biological life. Irradiated zones are depicted as desolate, surreal landscapes filled with mutated vegetation, unstable geological features, and invisible dangers, forcing characters to navigate carefully or suffer severe consequences. The show emphasizes that radiation is not uniformly lethal but exerts chronic effects over time, including sickness, mutation, and cumulative environmental degradation, highlighting the persistent challenges of long-term survival in a post-nuclear ecosystem. Environmental storytelling is used extensively to illustrate these effects, from abandoned towns consumed by toxic waste to forests of twisted flora and collapsed urban centers teeming with mutated predators, creating a tangible sense of a world transformed irrevocably by humanity's destructive choices. Season 1 also explores human adaptation to environmental hazards, showing how settlements, factions, and individuals modify behavior, architecture, and technology to survive. Vault dwellers, for example, are sheltered from immediate mutation effects, but must contend with contaminated air, water filtration challenges, and the indirect consequences of radiation on the external environment. The Brotherhood of Steel leverages technology such as power armor and radiation shielding to operate in irradiated zones, demonstrating the intersection of innovation and necessity, while raiders and scavengers employ protective gear, altered tactics, and environmental knowledge to maintain mobility and efficiency in areas lethal to the unprepared. Moldaver's faction exemplifies a particularly sophisticated approach, using both pre-war science and adaptive innovation to study mutation patterns, avoid unnecessary exposure, and harness mutated biological material for research or strategic advantage, further illustrating the complex interplay between risk, reward, and survival strategy in a post-apocalyptic landscape. In addition to creatures and radiation, the series portrays environmental hazards created by the remnants of pre-war society, including crumbling infrastructure, unstable buildings, exposed electrical systems, and derelict chemical plants, all of which combine with natural mutation to create zones of extreme danger. These hazards often serve as narrative catalysts, forcing characters into moral dilemmas, testing their ingenuity, or provoking factional conflict. Season 1 emphasizes that the environment itself can act as an antagonist, shaping human decisions, alliances, and survival outcomes, and that mastery over the wasteland requires understanding its combined natural, mutated, and artificial threats. The depiction of environmental scars also reinforces the series' underlying commentary on human hubris. The same technology and industrial development that fueled pre-war civilization now exacerbates post-war danger, creating persistent challenges for every individual or group attempting to rebuild. Thematic exploration of mutation extends beyond biology to symbolism, connecting environmental transformation with the moral and social challenges faced by survivors. The mutated world acts as a mirror, reflecting human choices, ethical compromises, and the consequences of unchecked ambition. Characters such as Lucy, the Ghoul, and Maximus encounter mutated beings and hazardous zones that force introspection, cooperation, and innovation, demonstrating that adaptation in the wasteland is as much psychological and moral as it is physical. Feral ghouls, for instance, challenge assumptions about humanity and monstrosity, prompting questions about empathy, identity, and the persistence of culture under extreme stress, while irradiated predators illustrate the brutal neutrality of nature and the necessity of strategic thinking in an unpredictable world. Season 1 also highlights the ecological impact of mutation on factional strategy. The Brotherhood of Steel, Moldaver's faction, and raider groups all interact differently with mutated species and hazardous zones, influencing territorial control, resource exploitation, and tactical decision-making. Factions capable of understanding and leveraging environmental changes gain advantages in survival, technological acquisition, and political negotiation, while those unable to adapt face extinction or assimilation. The series carefully demonstrates that knowledge of mutated creatures, radiation patterns, and environmental hazards is as valuable as weaponry or armor, reinforcing the idea that survival in the wasteland is an interplay of intelligence, adaptability, and courage. Finally, Season 1 portrays the mutated world as both a danger and an opportunity, shaping narrative tension and character development simultaneously. The wasteland's creatures, hazards, and environmental scars are inextricably linked to the ongoing human struggle for survival, power, and identity, making mutation not a backdrop, but a central actor in the post-war drama. By illustrating the interconnectedness of environment, technology, and human choice, the series establishes that adaptation is a continual process, requiring constant vigilance, ethical negotiation, and strategic foresight, and that the scars of the nuclear apocalypse, both literal and metaphorical, define the stakes of every decision, alliance, and confrontation in a world where the past, present, and future collide in unpredictable ways. Season 1 of the Fallout series presents the wasteland not merely as a physical space, but as a crucible in which competing ideologies collide, reflecting the human struggle to define morality, power, and purpose in the aftermath of civilization's collapse. Throughout the season, the central characters, Lucy, the Ghoul, and Maximus, embody distinct approaches to survival and belief, each navigating the ruins of the old world with differing philosophies that shape their interactions, alliances, and ethical choices, while the factions they encounter illustrate broader societal interpretations of hope, control, and the human condition. Lucy represents the enduring force of optimism, the belief that humanity can rebuild, cooperate, and preserve moral integrity despite the wasteland's horrors. Her journey emphasizes adaptability and compassion, showing that survival is not only physical but moral, and that maintaining ethical principles in a harsh environment is a deliberate, ongoing effort. By contrast, the Ghoul embodies the cynicism born of centuries of exposure to mutation, radiation, and human betrayal, offering a perspective grounded in pragmatism, skepticism, and survival above all else, often forcing characters and viewers alike to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, the inevitability of loss, and the compromises necessary to endure. Maximus, meanwhile, reflects the tension between loyalty and authority, shaped by his experiences in Shady Sands and the Brotherhood of Steel. His ideology is grounded in order, duty, and the belief that structured hierarchies and disciplined adherence to principle can preserve civilization, even when such systems may suppress individual freedoms or moral ambiguity. The series uses these three ideological lenses to explore broader conflicts between factions, showing how different conceptions of power, control, and ethical obligation manifest in interactions with the wasteland and its resources. The Brotherhood of Steel, for instance, exemplifies an authoritarian technocratic ideology, prioritizing the preservation of knowledge and technology over human autonomy, enforcing order with discipline and military rigor, and often viewing the broader populace as incapable of responsibly managing advanced machinery or knowledge. Moldaver's faction, conversely, embodies a technocratic humanist approach, emphasizing the potential of knowledge to empower rather than dominate, and acting as a counterpoint to the Brotherhood by advocating for ethical deployment of pre-war technology, while balancing practical survival imperatives against moral responsibility. Raiders and opportunistic factions demonstrate the survivalist extremist ideology, valuing immediate gain, personal strength, and resource accumulation, often functioning as the violent, unrestrained expression of a world stripped of centralized governance or ethical consensus. Season 1 highlights that these ideological frameworks are not static or absolute. Individuals within factions may adopt elements of competing philosophies, shift allegiances, or reinterpret principles according to circumstance, illustrating the fluidity of belief in a world where survival itself is a philosophical as well as physical challenge. Environmental and technological factors in the wasteland further intensify these ideological conflicts. Radiation, mutated creatures, and the scarcity of resources create a Darwinian pressure that tests ethical convictions, strategic decision-making, and social cohesion, revealing the strengths and limitations of different philosophies in practice. Lucy's optimism is tested in life-threatening situations where idealism may jeopardize survival. The Ghoul's pragmatism is challenged by situations demanding compassion or loyalty, and Maximus's strict adherence to order is strained by the unpredictability of environmental hazards, rogue technology, and moral dilemmas presented by factions such as Moldaver's scientists or hidden Vault-Tech systems. Season 1 emphasizes that ideology is not merely abstract. It is a set of operational choices, a guide for navigating both physical and social landscapes, and a measure of adaptability when confronted with the complex, morally ambiguous reality of the post-war world. Religion, ritual, and cultural memory also serve as ideological instruments within the series, illustrating how belief systems shape behavior, loyalty, and factional cohesion. Vault 33, with its structured governance, ceremonies, and educational indoctrination, demonstrates how ideology can be imposed, internalized, and transmitted across generations, influencing not only practical survival strategies but moral reasoning and interpersonal relationships. Similarly, the Brotherhood's codified rituals, hierarchies, and reverence for pre-war technology act as both ideological reinforcement and social control, ensuring cohesion while dictating acceptable interpretations of knowledge, power, and purpose. The season portrays these belief systems as double-edged. They provide stability, identity, and cohesion, but they also create blind spots, foster dogmatism, and can exacerbate conflict when ideology clashes with necessity, dissent, or competing philosophies. Season 1 further explores the tension between individual agency and systemic control, highlighting how personal ideology interacts with larger societal structures. Characters are forced to reconcile personal ethics with factional expectations, often making choices that expose them to moral ambiguity, personal risk, or strategic compromise. Lucy's decisions to aid survivors, negotiate with morally questionable factions, and pursue Moldaver reflect the balance between hope-driven action and pragmatic survival, demonstrating that idealism alone cannot guarantee positive outcomes, but can shape the moral arc of the narrative. The Ghoul's actions, grounded in long-term survival and caution, illustrate the limitations of skepticism when confronted with human need or technological opportunity, while Maximus's loyalty-driven ideology underscores the costs and consequences of obedience to authority, highlighting the potential for conflict between personal morality and institutional expectation. Technological access and control amplify ideological tensions. Power armor, pre-war relics, vault technologies, and robotics are not neutral tools but symbols of authority, ethical choice, and factional philosophy. The series demonstrates that the possession and deployment of technology often reflect underlying ideological priorities. The Brotherhood enforces control and restriction. Moldava emphasizes ethical use and dissemination. Raiders exploit without principle, and survivors navigate between these extremes based on immediate necessity or moral calculation. These interactions highlight how ideology and technology are intertwined in the post-war environment, shaping not only tactical outcomes but the ethical and psychological development of characters. It also emphasizes the consequences of ideological conflict on societal reconstruction. Competing visions for the future, be it authoritarian preservation, technocratic humanism, or survivalist opportunism, affect settlement patterns, factional alliances, and the trajectory of power in the wasteland. The series suggests that the post-apocalyptic environment is as much a test of philosophical resilience as it is of physical capability, where the moral coherence, adaptability, and strategic insight of individuals and factions determine who thrives, who survives marginally, and who is extinguished. The clashes between hope, control, and survival are not abstract, but manifest in concrete challenges. Securing scarce resources, navigating mutated zones, negotiating factional rivalries, and reconciling pre-war ideals with post-war realities. Ultimately, Season 1 portrays the ideological landscape of the wasteland as a dynamic, multi-layered arena where human values, ambitions, and survival imperatives intersect. Lucy's optimism, the Ghoul's pragmatism, Maximus's loyalty, and the competing philosophies of factions like the Brotherhood and Moldava's network collectively illustrate that the human condition in the Fallout universe is defined by the tension between ethical aspiration and pragmatic necessity. Hope, control, and survival are not merely motivations but lenses through which characters interpret the world, make decisions, and influence the trajectory of civilization itself. Through these interactions, the series underscores a central truth. In a world shattered by nuclear fire, the most enduring conflicts are not only physical but ideological, and the choices individuals make, shaped by belief, circumstance, and morality, will determine whether the wasteland becomes a crucible for renewal or a perpetuation of chaos, leaving an indelible imprint on the future of humanity. The Fallout series culminates in a narrative convergence that brings together the personal journeys of Lucy, the Ghoul, Maximus, and the broader conflicts between factions, pre-war technology, and ideological struggles, creating a finale that is both intensely dramatic and thematically resonant, while laying the groundwork for the moral, political, and technological challenges of Season 2. The climax is centered around the pursuit and confrontation with Moldava, whose knowledge and control over vault systems, pre-war technology, and factional networks serve as the pivot for the final episodes, forcing characters and viewers to confront the consequences of centuries-long planning, human ambition, and the unpredictable interplay of ideology and survival. Lucy's determination to recover vault secrets and protect innocence comes into direct conflict with Maximus's Brotherhood of Steel objectives, and the Ghoul's cautious pragmatism, generating a multi-layered tension in which alliances shift, moral compromises are demanded, and the true stakes of the wasteland, power, survival, and the potential for reconstruction, are fully revealed. The finale emphasizes that the apocalypse is not a singular event, but a continuing process in which past decisions, pre-war legacies, and individual actions intersect to shape the trajectory of entire regions, societies, and personal destinies. Throughout the climax, the series underscores the interplay between human ingenuity and pre-war technology. Moldaver's manipulation of Vault AI systems, security protocols, and hidden experimental installations creates both literal and metaphorical labyrinths that challenge characters to navigate physical danger, ethical dilemmas, and the psychological weight of historical knowledge. Season 1 portrays these technological confrontations as more than action set pieces. They are tests of character, philosophy, and leadership, demonstrating that mastery of tools alone is insufficient without moral clarity, adaptability, and strategic foresight. The Ghoul's experience and long-term survival skills complement Lucy's moral determination, while Maximus's tactical training and organizational authority highlight the tension between brute force, ideological rigidity, and nuanced problem-solving, illustrating that the wasteland rewards those who combine intellect, ethics, and adaptability. These sequences also highlight the recurring theme that technology is never neutral. It reflects and amplifies the intentions, values, and flaws of those who wield it, and the consequences of misuse, misunderstanding, or ethical compromise are immediate, lethal, and far-reaching. Factional dynamics reach their zenith in the finale, as the Brotherhood of Steel, Moldaver's scientific faction, and scattered remnants of the New California Republic, along with opportunistic raider groups, all intersect in contested territories where pre-war artifacts and vault secrets serve as both leverage and weaponry. The series meticulously tracks the ripple effects of these confrontations, showing that single decisions, whether an act of mercy, a strategic surrender, or the activation of a pre-war defense system, can alter territorial control, power balances, and survival probabilities across multiple settlements. Season 1 emphasizes that the wasteland functions as an ecosystem of interdependent choices. Actions have consequences that extend beyond immediate narrative beats, shaping not only the fates of central characters, but also the social, political, and technological landscape of the region. This narrative complexity reinforces the series' commitment to canon, portraying factional conflict and resource competition in ways consistent with established Fallout lore, while also introducing new strategic and ethical dimensions unique to the televised format. The climax also foregrounds moral and ideological dilemmas, reflecting the ongoing tension between hope, pragmatism, and authority explored throughout the season. Lucy's idealism is tested by the necessity of confronting Moldaver directly, navigating deadly traps, and negotiating with factions whose values conflict with her own, demonstrating that survival in the wasteland requires balancing principle with pragmatism. The Ghoul's skepticism provides a counterpoint, illustrating that experience and caution can prevent catastrophe, but also risk moral compromise if applied too rigidly or cynically. Maximus's loyalty to the Brotherhood, meanwhile, highlights the costs of ideological rigidity when confronted with unpredictable variables, forcing him to reconcile his duty with the broader consequences of his choices. These intersecting perspectives underscore the season's central thesis. In the post-apocalyptic world, ethical clarity is neither simple nor guaranteed, and the exercise of power, whether technological, political, or personal, carries profound and often unforeseen consequences. The physical, environmental, and mutated challenges of the wasteland reach their most intense expression in the finale, reinforcing the constant interplay between setting, survival, and narrative tension. Radiation zones, mutated creatures, environmental hazards, and collapsing infrastructure provide both narrative obstacles and symbolic reflections of humanity's failed stewardship of the planet. Characters are forced to adapt continuously, deploying knowledge, ingenuity, and courage to navigate these threats, while negotiating factional politics and moral dilemmas, creating a multidimensional climax in which every action is weighted by consequence. The series frames these dangers not as background spectacle, but as integral components of storytelling, emphasizing that the post-apocalyptic world itself is an active agent shaping decisions, alliances, and outcomes. The resolution of key plotlines is deliberately ambiguous, reflecting the complexity of the world and the unpredictability of post-war survival. Moldaver's fate, while addressed in tactical terms, leaves lingering questions about her long-term influence and the potential for recurrence, signaling that knowledge, technology, and ideology remain potent forces beyond immediate narrative closure. Factional positions, alliances, and power balances are similarly unsettled, ensuring that the wasteland remains a dynamic environment in which stability is provisional, and the consequences of prior actions reverberate across subsequent events. Season 1 thus establishes a foundation for Season 2 that is rich in narrative potential. Unresolved conflicts, emerging threats, and moral ambiguities provide fertile ground for exploring the consequences of power, technology, and human decision-making in an unstable world. The finale also cements thematic continuity across the season, linking character arcs, environmental storytelling, and ideological explorations into a coherent statement about resilience, choice, and the enduring consequences of human ambition. Lucy's optimism, the Ghoul's pragmatism, and Maximus's loyalty converge in ways that illuminate their strengths, vulnerabilities, and potential for growth, while the broader wasteland dynamics, factional politics, mutated ecosystems, and pre-war technological legacies underscore that survival is inseparable from understanding history, technology, and ethics. The season concludes with the implicit recognition that the wasteland is an ongoing experiment in human adaptation, where every decision reverberates, every ideology is tested, and every fragment of knowledge or technology can tip the balance between life, death, and the reconstruction of civilization. In summary, the Season 1 climax and its fallout establish a multifaceted narrative and thematic framework that bridges personal character journeys, ideological conflict, technological mastery, and environmental hazard, demonstrating that the post-apocalyptic world of Fallout is defined by the interplay of choice, consequence, and circumstance. By combining action, moral inquiry, and strategic complexity, the finale solidifies the season's canon-consistent portrayal of the wasteland, while establishing the stakes, tensions, and narrative possibilities for future seasons, ensuring that the story of Lucy, the Ghoul, Maximus, and the broader wasteland will continue to unfold in ways that are both compelling and deeply rooted in the Fallout universe.